This is hell.
Good morning, Chicago, Evanston, and all points beyond. This is hell. Manufacturing dissent since 1996. Alternative to alternative media. Independent from independent radio. This is not the media. This is hell. I'm your bitter, blind, broke, gap-toothed radio show host, Chuck Mertz, producing this morning's show on the other side of the glass in alphabetical order. Theron Humison. Good morning, Theron.
Good morning.
Do you have any money on the World Series?
No. Do you?
Yes, I do. I have money on San Francisco. I made the bet of the NL winner will win the World Series. The NL will win the World Series. I made that bet going into the playoffs, and so that's where I'm sitting right now. San Francisco against Kansas City. I'm hoping I will win.
You might do it.
I think I'm hoping so. Do you have any tips for me? My prognostication or gambling this weekend, sir?
Tips for no.
Damn it! You got to get me some tips, man. Also producing this morning show on the other side of the glass, Alex Jerry. Good morning, Alexander.
Yesterday was my 1-year anniversary of getting rocked by a taxi cab on Clark and Arthur.
Oh, really? You know what? I got to tell you something. Remember I fell on my shoulder and I thought I had a separated ACL?
Yeah.
So the other day I had my girlie looking at it, and she said, you do realize that your right shoulder sticks up out of your skin a little different than the other one now. I have a huge bump sticking out of my right arm.
Yeah, me too.
Really? We might have to compare bumps and see. Maybe I should see your orthopedist. Let's see. This morning, This Is Hell is broadcast live over the air every Saturday morning, 4 hours of completely unedited, uninterrupted radio, reporting the news and views that scare the hell out of big media, and we do it right here on Chicago Sound Experiment, WNUR 89.3 FM, streaming online at WNUR.org/live, and podcast shortly after at our website, thisishell.com, where you can sign up for our email newsletter, which sends to you each and every Monday morning a segmented version of the show, so you can listen to the entire show or however the hell you want. Your guests on this morning's This Is Hell are Doug Henwood is the editor and publisher of the Left Business Observer. Doug returns to This Is Hell this morning to discuss his new cover story in the November Harper's Stop Hillary, Vote No to a Clinton Dynasty. Doug is the author most recently of After the New Economy, The Binge, and The Hangover That Won't Go Away. You can find out more about Doug by going to the Left Business Observer website, leftbusinessobserver.com. We'll also be speaking with Academy Award nominee, two-time George Polk Book Award winner, co-founding editor of The Intercept, Jeremy Scahill, is an investigative reporter, war correspondent, and author of Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield, which was released last month in paperback. You can find out more about the book by going to dirtywars.org. Jeremy is going to be here in the Chicago area speaking at the 35th annual dinner celebration for Chicago Area Peace Action. It's a dinner and conversation with Jeremy Scahill, and it takes place next Saturday, November 1st at 6 p.m. at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Gym at 549 9th Street in Wilmette. Tickets for just the program start at $20, and for the entire dinner start at $75. For more information, visit ChiPeaceAction.org. That's C-H-I peaceaction.org. Jeremy's most recent writing is his post this week at The Intercept. Blackwater founder remains free and rich while his former employees go down on murder charges. Finally, on this morning's show, we'll be speaking with historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. She is author of the recently released An Indigenous People's History of the United States. Roxanne is Professor Emerita of Ethnic Studies at California State University at Hayward. Our irregular correspondents this morning will be reporting live from the hermetically sealed clean room at URL Labs. Ladio.com is going to talk to us about the new attempt at the awful net neutrality, and we may get into what is going on in the secretive TPP Pacific trade deal when it comes to copyright law. We'll also hear from the radical pessimist himself, Kevin Harris. He's going to be on to explain to us what the hell is going on in the Iran nuclear talks. And of course, as always, we end today's This Is Hell and almost all of our full-length This Is Hell programs with one single moment of truth from Jeff Dorchin live in live Los Angeles. Every week, This Is Hell is brave enough to be live, dumb enough to be goofy, and stupid enough to think that we can be a regular part of your Saturday morning hangover. Gentlemen, what's this morning's hangover cure?
This morning's hangover cure is yet another in a series of spicy hangover cures we will be offering over the next few weeks. This morning's cure is the Senegalese chicken stew yassa. Yassa, not to be confused with the secret written code of the same name created by Genghis Khan, is a spicy marinated food that can also be prepared with fish. Popular throughout West Africa. Chicken yassa is prepared with peppers, onions, and lemon, and is one of the most popular recipes in West Africa. As the website Epicurious describes it, yassa starts with a whole habanero pepper and ends with intense sweating and remorse. Delicious, delicious remorse. In fact, on Chicago's South Side at 79th between Evans and Langley, there's a restaurant named for yassa. So this morning's hangover cure is the spicy Senegalese chicken stew, yassa.
That sounds delicious.
Sounds
That
pretty
sounds
good,
damn
actually.
good. I know, and there's a new Senegalese restaurant up here on the north side that I really, really want to check out. Do you want to win Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything? Capitalism versus Climate Change? Then have one of the top 2 responses to this week's question from hell. You want to find out more about Naomi's book, all you have to do is go to thischangeseverything.org. But if you want to win her book, all you have to do is have one of the top 2 answers of this week's question from hell. This week's question from hell was prompted by our interview last week with Kevin Alexander Gray on This Is Hell. He was talking to us about white entitlement. So our question from hell for you, our listening audience, is: how do white people, or how do you, if you are white, benefit from white entitlement? How do white people, or how do you, if you are white, benefit from white entitlement? We already have a couple of responses. David says, you won't know until you're treated like a plantation owner by the black retail clerks in St. Louis. Wow. And that's the kind of response I was looking for, somebody who actually tells us their own personal experience. David, that is some creepy business. And I have heard similar stories about St. Louis. And Summer says, how do white people, or how do you, if you are white, benefit from white entitlement? Summer says, I haven't been shot at by police. So those are the responses we have so far. We got another response in an email, but I'm not going to be able to read that one on the air. We have a few others. We're hoping that you will go to our Facebook page right now. It's the top of our Facebook page. The question from hell, the top 2 responses will receive a copy of Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything. By the way, wait a second. Do I want to get to listeners' email? Yeah, that's what I want to do. This is from Ryan. Ryan writes, Chuck, you picked my answer during last week's question from hell segment. I totally want a copy of Naomi Klein's latest book. What do I need to do? I've been listening to you guys for about 9 years now. I can't thank you enough for what you do. One day I'll get to a meet and greet so I can buy you a beer. So, Ryan, we will be getting out that copy of Naomi Klein's book to you. All we need is your mailing address. I got this from you in email, so you could just email me, chuck@thisishell.com, your mailing address, and we'll get the book out to you. Ryan also says, if you're looking for an interesting topic for the show, a long-form interview with one of the targets of Gamergate in your style would be amazing. The short interviews Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn have done on Democracy Now! And MSNBC have been inadequate. There's a lot more to this story. These women have been the targets of a hate and disinformation campaign from the reactionary depths of the internet that has lasted for years. The public needs to know more about the tactics of the groups targeting Anita and Zoe, and there's a video on YouTube. Again, this is Ryan suggesting Gamergate, and I guess you could just search on Gamergate at YouTube and you could find out more about it. I've got another email from a listener I want to tell you about in just a little bit and what they have done to help out our show. But right now, I got to tell you something. Back in 2013, I would say probably August, July of 2013, I got an email from a blogger by the name of Lou Siegel. And it said in it, this is 2000, we're not even a full year into the second term of the Obama administration. And this blogger says that we must now, back in August 2013, July 2013, we must now begin supporting Hillary Clinton because it's the only way that Democrats can keep the White House in Democratic Party hands. To tell us why we might not want to have Hillary Clinton to be keeping the White House for us in Democratic Party hands, Doug Henwood is the editor and publisher of the Left Business Observer and the author most recently of After the New Economy, a fantastic book published at the New Press New Press Publishers. He has the cover story in the November Harper's Stop Hillary, Vote No to a Clinton Dynasty. Again, Doug's book is called After the Economy, The Binge and the Hangover That Won't Go Away. You can find out more about Doug by going to his website, leftbusinessobserver.com. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, Chuck. It's good to be in hell here.
It's always great to have you on the show, sir. And if there is any article that has made me think of so many awful, hellish outcomes and awful, hellish questions, it's this one. You write that under Obama, we avoided a full-blown depression, but the job market remains deeply sick, and it's become quite mainstream to talk about the U.S. economy having fallen into structural stagnation, though the rich are thriving. Barack Obama has, if anything, seemed more secretive than George W. Bush. He kills alleged terrorists whom his predecessor would merely have tortured. The climate crisis gets worse, and the political capacity to talk about it, much less do anything about it, is completely absent. People who voted for Obama in 2008 were imagining a more peaceful, more egalitarian world, and they haven't gotten it. But, Doug, many would say that none of these things are Obama's fault, and some would even argue no president has the ability to actually affect real change. The economic problems are structural, and as long as the rich benefit, both parties will have similar agendas other than incremental changes to public assistance, which have a devastating impact on the most vulnerable people's lives. National security agenda simply doesn't change from president to president because even though there are changes in administrations, there are no changes in national security policymakers. Torture couldn't be prosecuted, and Gitmo couldn't be closed down, and whatever else you want to add to that list because the opposition party blocked Obama. In other words, change can't happen, so there's no need for hope. Can change happen, Doug?
Well, I suppose in the abstract you can, but, you do paint a convincing picture there that there are a whole lot of structural constraints in American politics and the whole structure of the American economy that make it very, very difficult. I think a lot of people expected that much would happen when Obama took office in 2009. And while the stimulus program was a pretty good thing, although could have been better, but it was a pretty decent thing. That since then, I think he's just been one disappointment after another. And I had not been a big fan of him going into the 2008 election. I thought he was just basically a neoliberal Democrat, and I think I feel vindicated by the last 6 years. But it still makes me sad that we had this moment where people were really. I think there's a real hope that something might change, that the economic policies of the last 3 decades would change. That we would have a less warlike foreign policy, less secrecy in government. None of this has come to pass. We've just gotten basically a lot more of the same. There are some exceptions, and God knows, the Republicans are a horrible party. I don't want to say that there's no difference between the two parties, but I'm afraid we're just stuck in this status quo. Now, at least with Obama, there was the illusion that something would change. With Hillary, she is the status quo. She's the embodiment of the status quo. And it's so depressing to me to think that she is sort of waltzing towards this coronation. Who knows what will eventually happen, but that's the way it feels right now. When we're actually having no serious political conversation about all the things that I wrote about in that piece that excerpt you read, where we're just in this deep structural mess. And I think the likelihood of Hillary becoming the nominee and the high likelihood of her becoming president, it's just, I think, a symptom of that mess, not a way out. We're really, the dynasty question is part of it. Another Bush-Clinton election, could that really be happening? But also just the politics that she represents. She represents the kind of new Democrat that Bill Clinton, helped create 20 years ago. She was very much at his side doing that. She was very much a part of that. That kind of approach, that business-friendly, hawkish, tough approach to everything, I think seems really tired and really inadequate to the situation we're in right now, but we just can't even think our way out of it, much less get our way out of it.
But while a lot of Obama supporters would say that they blame the Republicans for all their obstructionism, and that's the reason why he couldn't get things done, let's flip that on its head. To what degree are Democrats responsible for what many progressives might see as the failures of the Barack Obama administration? Well, I understand that you looked at his history and you saw that he was just another neoliberal Democrat going into power. A lot of people didn't see it that way. So how much of the blame of the lack of hope, the lack of change that we have within the Obama administration, can we simply just lay at the feet of the Democratic Party, because they're going to be the ones who are still running the show, whoever the next president is?
Hal Draper, the political theorist, wrote this essay in 66, 67, I can't remember, but somewhere around then, in which he described this problem of the two-party system where the Republicans are crazy. The Democrats will say, oh, you have to vote for us because the Republicans are so crazy. And then all the liberals and the left and labor go along with the Democrats because the alternative is so much worse. And so this formula still applies, more than 40 years later, that the Democrats have an important part in creating this situation, because all they do is make compromises with the right. They figure that labor, left, liberals are in their pocket, and what they try to do is make compromises with the right, which is not a feeling like the Republicans ever feel like they have to make a compromise with the Democrats or anybody on their left. So it's just very great imbalance in this situation. And then at the same time, you have people who might know better making all kinds of excuses before all these compromises. Obama came into office with something like over a 60% approval rating, control of both houses of Congress, an election that felt to a lot of people like an actual mandate for departure from old policies. Now, if you go back and listen to Reagan's early speeches when he was first president, starting with his first inaugural, he said, it was very clear, we're making a break with the old way of doing things. We can't go back to that old discredited way of doing things. And he launched a really bold program of reform from his point of view that was politically very, very successful. And we're still living in the shadow of that. Obama had the opportunity to do something similar. If he said in his inaugural address, we're just like making a clean break with the old way of doing things. We're not going to do everything in the interest of Wall Street and the rich and military contractors. We're going to end the secrecy in government. We're going to end all these programs of spying. We're going to restore civil liberties. But he didn't really do any of that, and he immediately started trying to compromise with Republicans. It didn't make any political sense then. 2 years later, when he certainly had some congressional losses, you could say it might have made more sense. But coming into office in the midst of this economic crisis in 2009, he could have done a lot, and he really didn't push it. I mean, all these liberals and Democrats will act as if the presidency is a powerless office. The president could do a lot. There are plenty of things he could have done in climate change by executive order that he's only getting around to now and in a very weak way. And at the same time, he's also promoting fracking and drilling everywhere. I mean, he's really basically a drill baby drill guy. But then he'll have some symbolic, modest efforts around climate. But we're not taking this crisis seriously. We're not taking the economic crisis seriously. And the idea that Hillary could then be his successor seems to me such a confession of exhaustion and resignation that it just makes me want to hang my head in despair.
Yeah, and when I read your article, it made me want to hang my head in despair, too. And one of the things that you talk about is, why don't people, if you look at the history, the record for Hillary Clinton, if you look at her record, you will see the kind of person that she would be, that she has been as senator, that she was as first lady, and that she could be as president of the United States. But a lot of times people don't look back in that record. And you were saying at the very starting of our conversation how you could see that Barack Obama was just another neoliberal Democrat. I had this argument on the air with Spencer Ackerman before I think this was probably in June, I believe it was, of 2008. And I said, it sounds like the Obama doctrine, wherein the candidate Obama said that he would bomb targets within Pakistan without asking the country of Pakistan if he believed that those targets were going to be a threat to the United States. I said, how is that any different from the Bush administration policy? And Spencer Ackerman said, because he'll do it right.
Yes.
So how is it that you saw just another neoliberal Democrat? How is it that I saw somebody who was going to be maybe just as militant as George W. Bush, but other people didn't see that? What did you see about Barack Obama in his past that signaled that he was just going to be another neoliberal Democrat?
Well, he was adopted from a very early age by elite foundations and people like that, and groomed for leadership from his 20s. And guy is obviously very talented, very smart, a good politician up to a point, but I think he's proven in office not to be such a great one. But a good campaigner, charming, good-looking, very intelligent, very sophisticated. But I think he comes out of this kind of elite foundation world that is very comfortable with finance, is okay with minor symbolic actions around poverty, but nothing really that's going to rock the boat. And he had all his friends in Chicago, or the whole Chicago establishment. He just seemed to be a good face for what is essentially business as usual. I mean, he represented the illusion of a departure from business as usual, but in fact, he has really only consolidated business as usual while in office. And some people have complained about my article on Hillary that I'm just bringing up a whole lot of ancient history. I mean, this seems to be an American disease. You think that history is bunk. But I think looking at her long history, going back into the 70s, it very reveals this conservative, secretive, really untrustworthy kind of character. And I think in office, she would be very much like her husband, but without the charm and without the economic boom that we had in the late 90s. It seems like Republican light. A generation ago, these people would have been Republicans, and now Republican Party is a crackpot formation, and the Democrats have become the kind of what used to be a Rockefeller Republican.
Yeah, and you also mentioned something that disturbs me a lot, and that's when Democrats praise President Reagan. You mentioned President Obama praising Reagan, and then, Obama never tried to make a sharp political break with the past, as Reagan did from the moment of his first inaugural address. Reagan dismissed the post-war Keynesian consensus, the idea that government had a responsibility to soften the sharpest edges of capitalism by fighting recession and providing some sort of basic safety net. Appropriating some of the language of the left about revolution and the promise of the future, Reagan unleashed what he liked to call the magic of the marketplace, cutting taxes for the rich, eliminating regulations, and whittling away at social spending. But, Doug, these are the new Democrats. Well, not so new, but people like Barack and Rahm Emanuel who want to sell off everything to the highest bidder under the idea that the marketplace is democratic and that with competition and without government interference, we can do everything cheaper and better. Until that idea is commonly accepted to have failed, it will be pursued by both sides, Republicans and Democrats. Why hasn't privatization failed yet, as not just as an actual activity, but why hasn't it failed as a political agenda?
Well, rich people control a lot of the process, and rich people are doing fine by it. In some cases, like school issues, for example, and it's important, I point out in the piece that Hillary and Bill really pioneered this attack on teachers' unions when they were back in Arkansas. And you could see it today all over politics. But they're among the originators of this attack on. The problem with our school system is that teachers, there are too many bad teachers, and we need to fire teachers. And that they invented this thing practically, and now we hear it just all over the place. But a lot of those people who embrace that kind of model of school reform, the privatization, the charterization of everything, have lost elections. I mean, Adrian Fenty in Washington lost re-election mainly around that issue. It's been rejected in Newark and other places. I don't really know, not in Chicago, but I think Rahm Emanuel has certainly alienated a lot of people with his school agenda. So, the people, when it's out there and there are actual elections that turn around this topic, the school reformers, privatizers often lose. But when you get to the national level, you have people like Education Secretary Arne Duncan, who came out of Chicago, who is as enthusiastic a school privatizer as any Republicans. I mean, he said things about the New Orleans charterization of the school system after Hurricane Katrina that are indistinguishable from what Milton Friedman said at the time. But they don't get called on this because at local elections, they can have a very specific focus on these kinds of issues and very specific personalities. And there's the influence of big money perhaps isn't quite so powerful and noxious as it is at the national level. But this agenda has failed utterly. But no one ever calls them on it. And you also have this situation where I remember during the 08 campaign, Barbara Ehrenreich, who I admire a great deal, so I don't want to be too critical of her, but she and some people got together and created this Progressives for Obama. I don't know whether it was a movement or a blog or exactly what it was, but at the time they said we're going to hold his feet to the fire to make sure he hews to some sort of progressive platform. They don't do it. They never do it. They hold back on the criticisms because if you criticize them, you're going to empower the Republicans or the brown shirts who are ready to take power. The anti-war movement collapsed, so there's actually very, very little organized opposition to the endless drone warfare. There's been very, very little organized opposition to any of the incursions in civil liberties. Obama's prosecution of leakers is far greater than Bush's were of any of his predecessors. So that's one thing where I was actually disappointed. I didn't expect much from him on a lot of things, but I expected there would be improvement at least on civil liberties. And we haven't seen that even. I mean, we've gotten, in many ways, as James Risen, the New York Times reporter, said in an interview with Salon the other day, that Obama has institutionalized a whole lot of the war on terror practices that the Bush administration just slapped together on the fly. So in that sense, he's made them permanent. He's institutionalized them. And there is no criticism of it because the likely members of a anti-war or pro-civil liberties movement are disarmed by the fact that it's a Democrat doing these things. But I think also a lot of them think, as Spencer Ackerman said, we trust Obama with all this secrecy because he's going to do it right. He's like us. He's smart. He's a constitutional law professor. He's not a yahoo like Bush or Ted Cruz or somebody like that. But you just don't want to give the central government that kind of power. And we should really think that regardless of the person out holding the office, it's just not something a government should do, to be so free to spy on us and repress us. But the natural opposition, all the civil libertarians, are disarmed of the fact it's a Democrat doing it.
We are speaking with Doug Henwood. He is the editor and publisher of the Left Business Observer. You can find out more about that by going to leftbusinessobserver.com. Doug has the cover story in the November Harper's Stop Hillary, Vote No to a Clinton Dynasty. Doug is the author most recently of After the New Economy, The Binge and the Hangover That Won't Go Away. While Barbara Ehrenreich might be a little hesitant to be critical of the Obama administration because it might feed into the critiques that are held by people who watch Fox News, I don't see anything within your article that even could be taken out of context to support a Republican or conservative critique of Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton. I think that everything in here, if a Republican read it, they would say, oh, no, that sounds good. Oh, that sounds like a great plan. Oh, this sounds really good. I don't see anything in your critique that would suggest that this is the kind of material that could be used against Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. I just want to make sure that people understand that this is a criticism that isn't coming from the right. This is a criticism that's coming from a different perspective.
Yeah, I would like to make 2 points about that. One is that there are a whole lot of Democrats suffering from attacks on Twitter from people who don't like the piece either. Oh, of course they haven't read it.
Right.
They sort of, some of the people I quote in the piece they don't like, and they just know that it has to be terrible, terrible, terrible. And by criticizing Hillary, I'm just objectively giving support to President Ted Cruz. I mean,
right.
That's the kind of thinking that goes on there. But on the other hand,
by the way, let the record show Doug Henwood was the first person to say President Ted Cruz on our show. So.
Yes, I hope it's not a forecast for the future, but we never know. But the other thing is that I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the neocons actually endorsing a Hillary candidacy. There is this isolationist streak in the Republican Party that's really showing, and I think it makes a lot of people like Bill Kristol and folks like that nervous. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to see some of them endorsing Hillary. She's really tough. She's very warlike. When she got to the Senate, she made a beeline for the Armed Services Committee, which is not something usually that a senator from New York does. But she wanted to, I think, first of all, establish herself image-wise as a hawk, but also to make friends in the world of the military. She got to be very friendly with guys in the uniformed services, and she also got to be very friendly with Republicans in the Senate. One of the first things she did it was to befriend a lot of the people on the other side of the aisle, some of whom had been the leaders of the movement to impeach her husband, which is really very bizarre. She joined a right-wing prayer club and started hanging out with the likes of Sam Brownback. So she does have this deep conservative, warlike streak. She supported the welfare reform bill that Bill signed in '96, which has thrown millions of women and children into poverty, yet she's presented as an advocate of women and children. So I think it wouldn't surprise me to see some kind of more sober, centrist, sane conservatives endorse Hillary because the Republican Party who knows who they're going to nominate, but I think people who are partisans of stability and continuity might actually prefer Hillary to some Republican lunatic.
We always hear the refrain as we're getting up to election time. You mentioned it right at the beginning of our conversation this morning, and that is that both parties are the same. You always hear that criticism. What difference does it make if I vote for the Republican or the Democrat? It doesn't make any difference because both parties are the same. As Noam Chomsky has pointed out, the incremental changes between those two parties could have an incredible, possibly a devastating impact on people's lives who live on the margin when it comes to people who are dependent on social services. So there is always this kind of incremental difference, but you point out in your article that there is going to be a very big difference. There's a possibility, and you were just mentioning it, a very big difference between the Republican and Democratic candidate if Hillary Clinton were to be the Democratic candidate, and that is we could have a vote between isolationism from the Republican Party and militarism from the Democratic Party. Is that going to be really, are Democrats going to go out and vote for militarism over isolationism?
Who knows? But I think they're just so partisan and so unthinking that they may do that. I mean, the attitude that the reaction from a lot of partisan Democrats to my critique of Hillary has been they're almost Stalinist in their intolerance of critique. I mean, they're just their belief in party discipline and loyalty and keeping your mouth shut is really. Thank God they haven't brought out the firing squads yet, but they're not open to critique or reflection or thought or they say, okay, we've been doing this new Democrat thing for now 20, 25 years, and it's really not adequate to the times. They're not really into thinking that way. The Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, is an example of a neoliberal social policy in almost perfect form. A neoliberal looks at a social problem and say, how can we create a market to solve this? So we'll pollution, let's trade pollution credits. Healthcare, let's create a healthcare marketplace. And the best parts of Obamacare, the expansion of Medicaid, are using the public sector. The worst parts of it are these forcing us to buy private insurance if you're above the poverty level, and the health exchanges and all these things. It's a marketplace solution to what should be a public sector problem. But we're not seeing anything like that. We're seeing what is essentially a Republican approach. 25 years ago, the Heritage Foundation came up with something very much like the Obamacare model, and now it is Democrats embracing it. Romney Care was also a model. Romney Care in Massachusetts was also a model for it. But this also exemplifies this structural pattern we see where the Republicans propose something insanely right-wing. The Democrats say, well, let's water that down a bit and we can accept it. So you have this march to the right in which the Republicans take the lead in a bold and apparently nutty fashion. Yet the Democrats then sort of give it their seal of approval, maybe soften it a little bit, and that's the way the political progress has happened over the last 30 years. It's been the Democrats basically yielding to the policy innovations that the Republicans have brought about.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on in this morning's show with Henry Waxman and the way that he has come up with a new version of net neutrality, a little bit of watered-down version of the conservative type of net neutrality, again showing that the Republicans or the Democrats are willing to give concessions. You were talking about how the Clintons were kind of the leaders or the beginners, I should say, the people who coined the whole anti-teachers union movement. This happened during the 1980 gubernatorial administration for Bill Clinton in Arkansas. He ran in 1976, wins, loses in 1978, partly because he has taxes raised to fix the roads. He realizes that anti-tax is the way to go in Arkansas, but he wants to have reform, so he says, I'm going to, he runs again in 1980, wins, after serving, not being in office from 1978 to 1980. He wins in 1980 and says he's going to reform education, and he goes about that by attacking the teachers union, knowing that that's a very good target. You also point out how he and Hillary were the ones behind the welfare reform, but this started even, the Clintons, you can even go farther back. As you write, while at the Rose Law Firm in the 1970s, Hillary's allegiances began to shift. The community organizing group Acorn, then based in Arkansas and very much in the Saul Alinsky tradition, got a ballot measure passed that would lower electricity rates for residential users in Little Rock and raise them for commercial users. Business, of course, was not pleased and filed a legal challenge with Rose representing them. Wade Rathke, the founder of Acorn, a friend of Hillary Clinton's, was shocked to see her arguing the case in court. And not only did she argue the case, she helped to craft the underlying legal strategy, which was that the new rate schedule amounted to an unconstitutional taking of property. This is now a common right-wing argument against regulation, and Hillary was one of its early architects. So is Hillary Clinton then one of the early architects, in a way, of the politicization, maybe, of neoliberalism?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the two of them, and when I started doing the research for this piece, I didn't really appreciate how deeply involved she was from the beginning in Bill's political career and the whole New Democrat strategy. That there's a revelation. She has been very actively involved from the beginning. And the two of them together, they have complementary talents. Bill is a much more effective politician. He's much more charming. People who know them say his mind is sharper than hers, but she is really, pretty sharp on her own. But she is much more of a technician. She's doesn't have the charm that he does. He is, of course, one of the great politicians of all time, but she is not. But their talents are complementary. She's more of as I quote Dick Morris in the piece, which annoys people, but he's not an uninteresting character. He said she has the mind of a trial lawyer, and I think the two of them together, his kind of roving, almost undisciplined mind, and her much more systematic way of approaching things. The two of them together helped create this whole New Democrat structure, this whole New Democrat ideology. They were very involved in creating the Democratic Leadership Council way back in the early 90s. So they've been at this for a long time, and it's really, really tired now. She also she was a leader of working with Tony Blair to create a kind of international of the New Democrats, the so-called Third Way movement. And of course, Tony Blair, now utterly discredited and unpopular, but we're still afflicted with Hillary, even though the Brits wouldn't even give Tony Blair the time of day now.
You write the Clintons' welfare reform, which Hillary has admitted to completely supporting. Quote, in August 2014, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities published a report on how the Clinton welfare regime, officially designated as Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, had worked out over the longer term. They found that TANF is serving fewer families despite increased demands, that the value of benefits has eroded to the point where beneficiaries can't meet their basic needs, and that it does far less to reduce poverty than its predecessor, the AFDC. In addition, the report noted that almost all of the early employment gains by single mothers have since been reversed. So the outcome of Clintonian welfare reform has been more need, less help to the point of less money for food, heat, clothing, rent, doing less than earlier programs to reduce the number of poor people, and all the gains single mothers were finally making in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they've disappeared. Bill Clinton has said that he has his he regrets passing the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and I've even heard him say some doubts about welfare reform. Is there any way that we could be voting for Hillary Clinton to fix the problems that Bill Clinton made? Is there any way that she would come in and say, Telecommunications Act of 1996, Bill's right, that was wrong, let's get rid of it, and welfare reform, Bill's right, there are problems with it, let's change it?
Well, it'd be really nice to hear her say that. I would really love if she went up and gave a speech and said, that welfare reform, we thought it was going to work out, but it's been a terrible mistake, and we need to revisit this and provide for a decent minimum income, not just for single mothers and their children, but for everyone. If we could have a basic social safety net, a decent welfare state. If she got up there and gave a speech like that, I would withdraw my criticisms of her, but I really would be shocked to hear her give a speech like that. If anything, she's much more in the Wall Street pocket than she was 20 years ago. The two of them, and now that Chelsea has joined the foundation, the whole family, they have a family business, and it's politics. And that through their foundation, which is now, I believe, been renamed the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, they conduct these extravaganzas and these modest philanthropic programs and raise enormous amounts of money from rich people and corporations. They've raised over $1 billion just over something like over the last decade. A Hillary presidential campaign is projected to be able to raise $1 billion or more dollars. You don't raise billions of dollars from rich people and business interests by talking about helping single mothers. You talk about responsible economic policy and balanced budgets and that sort of thing. So if she gave that speech, I would become a fan. But I really don't think I'm going to have to be eating my words anytime soon.
Doug, one of the things that really gets me is that all the things that you bring up in this amazing article that you have at Harper's on Hillary Clinton, I don't think that they are going to become campaign issues, because I don't think important things become campaign issues. If the two parties don't disagree, then they're not going to be a campaign issue. I seriously doubt that climate change is going to be a campaign issue. I seriously doubt that welfare is going to be a campaign issue, that the charter schools, the privatization of schools, that neoliberalism is going to be a campaign issue, that the changes that the Clinton administration made in welfare reform, all of the things that could make Hillary Clinton vulnerable, I don't think any of those things are going to be campaign issues. So is she going to be challenged at all in this campaign by the things that you suggest she should be challenged by within your article?
Well, it certainly doesn't look that way. Excuse me. There's a possibility of some primary challenges. People are always looking to Elizabeth Warren to raise some of these issues.
Right.
Warren is apparently rather hawkish on foreign policy, so I'm not sure how she'd challenge Hillary on that. But it would be interesting to see at least something of a challenge to Hillary's Wall Street connections and their economic orthodoxy. But Warren keeps saying she's not running, although she's sounding a little more tentative about that. There's Jim Webb, who's the guy who has many problems in his own, but could at least open up the conversation in the primary season, at least.
But still a conservative foreign policy, again.
Yeah. Well, he's a mixed bag on foreign policy. He's got some weird sympathies with the Confederacy.
Right.
But anyway, it'd make for a much more interesting and perhaps politically fruitful. I don't know.
So
the American politics can always be dumb, but it'd be interesting to have some serious challengers rather than just having her march unchallenged towards a coronation.
So do we have to wait for some miracle so Bernie Sanders suddenly becomes very attractive?
I'm afraid that Bernie is not the ideal candidate. He may have many admirable positions, but he's just not going to get very far.
Yeah, I don't think so.
He doesn't have the political electricity that you need to challenge a figure like Hillary.
One of the other things I was thinking about, too, Doug, is just how sustainable the politics that we are living in today are. And by that, I mean, I always hear Democrats say, well, I'm just voting for the lesser of two evils. And I am sure that Republicans say the exact same thing, that both sides know that the candidate that they're voting for doesn't really represent everything that they wish they would represent, but that they really represent, the moneyed interests, the powers in Washington, and hopefully some of that we'll get some few crumbs, either on the Republican side or the Democratic side. And both, I think, the Republicans and Democrats are voting for the lesser of two evils. How sustainable is that? How long can we continue a Democratic Party and a Republican Party where their rank and file aren't voting for them because they're excited about voting for this person, but they're voting for them because they don't want the other person in power?
Well, on the one hand, I would say that it's tempting to think that this is a society in decline, that America is really just falling apart and rotting gradually, or maybe not so gradually. We're polarizing and in every way, and just unable to think or talk seriously about what's going on around us. And maybe this kind of politics you describe is just a symptom of that decline, and instead of presenting a way out of it, it just reinforces it. I would say, though, that some of the Republicans actually do have principles. They believe in things, as crazy as they are, and they will fight for them passionately. I can't see anything similar on the Democratic side of the spectrum. I don't really see a core philosophy other than just adherence to the status quo and the powers that be. But I don't see like a vision of life of what a good society should look like. And I think that absence of a philosophical core on the Democratic liberal side of the spectrum is visible in the political weakness. And partly this is a structural issue of the Democratic Party. It is a party that is essentially a business party that has to pretend to be otherwise for electoral reasons. So you get these situations where the Democrats look, why do they look so weak? Why do they look so compromised? Why don't they have any backbone? It's because they're having to serve their real master while apparently not showing that they are. So that's they have to appeal to their base at the same time they're trying to satisfy Wall Street. So that's the structural problem of the Democrats. But that kind of contradiction leaves them without any core philosophy that one can get passionate about. So you see the Republicans who just never stop fighting, are just relentless fighters for their point of view, and Democrats who just like throw out their hands. They don't know how to face that kind of enemy because they don't have that core passion that keeps the Republicans going.
Doug Henwood is the editor and publisher of the Left Business Observer. Doug returned to This Is Hell this morning to discuss his cover story in the new November Harper's Stop Hillary, Vote No to a Clinton Dynasty. Doug is the author most recently of After the New Economy, The Binge, and The Hangover That Won't Go Away. You can find out more about Doug by going to leftbusinessobserver.com. Doug, as always with all of our guests, our last question is the question from hell, the question we hate to ask, you might hate to answer. Our audience is going to hate the response. I am very fortunate, and I think that you are very fortunate too. You live in New York City, right?
Yes.
You and I are both very fortunate because I believe in 1992, 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012. We didn't have to vote for the Democratic candidate for president because we knew that our state was going to go with, I'm here in Chicago and Illinois, our state is going to go with the Democratic candidate. I didn't have to vote for Bill Clinton. I didn't have to vote for John Kerry. I didn't have to vote for Al Gore. I didn't have to vote for Barack Obama because I knew that the Democrat was going to win our state. It's a huge problem with the Electoral College, but nonetheless, I knew that they were going to win that state, so I didn't have to vote for them. But if I was in a state where it was some Republican versus Hillary Clinton and it was going to be close, I really hate to say this, I might be slithering in there to vote for Hillary Clinton because I'm concerned about the incremental changes, the incremental differences between the Republican and Democratic Party and how those affect people who live on the margins. If you were in a contested state, would you end up voting for Hillary Clinton?
I don't really know. I voted for Obama in 2008 because I thought, I didn't really expect much from him, but I thought that we just needed to maybe have some kind of modest change. But I also thought that he would be a disappointment in office and provoke a kind of disillusionment that might lead people to ask more systemic questions than just think about parties and personnel. And we did get that disillusionment afterwards, and I think the Occupy movement was a symptom of that, but that all then sputtered out. But I did not vote for Obama in 2012. The line was like an hour too long in my local precinct, and I said, it's just not worth the effort. And I'm not sure what I would do now. I could understand if people wanted to vote for Hillary for the reasons you mentioned, but I would say that people who make that decision should be clear on what they're doing. That they should have no illusions that she's a great advocate for women and children, and that she's going to be, in any sense, progressive. I think if people say, this is the best we can do, I know it stinks, it's sad, but this is what I have to do just because she's marginally better than a Republican opponent, that's okay, I suppose. Just don't try to tell me that she's anything but a servant of money and power, and don't try to delude yourself or others with anything to the contrary.
Well, Doug, I am sure that Hillary will have as much success when she becomes president in making this a post-sexist America as Barack Obama has made this a post-racist America, post-racial America. Thank God that's finally going to happen.
Yes.
All right, Doug, fantastic to hear your voice again. I'm going to bug you to have you back on this show.
Oh, it's always good to be here. And I should say that Harper's, this stuff is not on the web. It's only available to subscribers or to people who get the magazine on the newsstand.
But the magazine
is now trickling into newsstands.
And the magazine's damn cheap. What is it, $16 a year?
It's $15 a year for a subscription, and it's a great magazine.
Yeah.
I understand if people are broke and $15 is a lot of money, but if you have some money, it's really a great magazine. And if you don't want to make the commitment, it's now trickling into newsstands. There's going to be a especially large shipment to Barnes & Noble.
It's getting cold enough out, so you're not really suspicious when you're wearing a big jacket in the bookstore.
Yes.
Doug, always great to hear your voice.
Thank you, John.
Take care.
Bye.
This is Hell. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. This week's question from Hell is, how do white people, or how do you, if you are white, benefit from white entitlement? The best two responses to the question from Hell, which are posted at the This Is Hell Facebook page, will win a copy of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change. You can find out more about that book by going to thischangeseverything.org. And Naomi Klein is going to be in Chicago. I will tell you a little bit about that event in just a few minutes. But when we went to Doug, I was saying that we got some emails this week, and we got one email from a listener who is doing exactly what we hope you as listeners will do. He has donated. He has given something to someone because he learned about it through this radio show. Here's the email that we were CC'd on. This is an email to Glenn Ford, the great Glenn Ford over at the Black Agenda Report. This is from a gentleman by the name of Greg. He says, "Hello, I made a small donation to the Black Agenda Report. I wanted you to know that I would never have known about you if not for your interviews by This Is Hell and Chuck Mertz. Let me tell you something. If you hear about anything on this show, the Scalibration that's going on with Red Moon, the Great Chicago Fire Festival that happened with Red Moon, when we did the spring thing with Red Moon, if you go to an Oobleck show because of us, if you get a book because of us, if you hear about an organization because of us and you donate to them, please mention us. Please tell them that you heard about them from This Is Hell. Please tell everybody you know, if you're getting in contact with them due to This Is Hell, tell them that you heard about them from This Is Hell. We truly appreciate that. More importantly, for Greg's donation, we appreciate you donating to the Black Agenda Report. Later on in this morning's show, I'm going to talk about Consortium News, Bob Perry's amazing organization. That's another group that you could be donating to. We have a donate button at our site, but we want you to donate, if you can, to the organizations that we talk to on the air on a weekly basis. Baffler, Jacobin, what else? N+1, Consortium News. There are so many different organizations that could really use your support. So please keep showing your support. And Greg, I cannot thank you enough for that donation to the Black Agenda Report. I saw some insane coverage of the attacks in Ottawa this week. We'll be getting to that in just a bit. Who do we have on the line? Isn't it Laddie?
Live from the hermetically sealed clean room at URL Labs, this is Hell's Cyber Sherpa, Ladio.com.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. Man, remember when your computer made all those noises? It was like You know, it was like we're in a submarine. What the hell was with that thing? I told you that flashing lights
It did make for a good intro, though.
It did, but I told you that hooking up your light bright to make zeros and ones was not going to make a computer. But you did it somehow. I don't know how you did it. It ran on potatoes. That was the most amazing.
And then you changed your mind, didn't you?
That's right.
You started calling it Sir.
Yes, Sir Bob, if I remember correctly. I still have the whip marks from
Right.
it.
May I have another? Sir White Bright?
Hey, so we were just talking to Doug Henwood, and he was talking about concessions that the Democratic Party keeps making over and over to crazy Republican ideas. Then they send them back out as watered-down versions. I think you found another one this week.
No, I kind of wanted to go at odds with that, but we'll go into that. How about we hold on that and let me go,
All right.
and then we'll revisit that issue because I'm not sure I'm on the same page with you on that,
All right, let's see.
or whoever's spreading that kind of mindset inside of your cadre.
All right. So what do you
I
got?
just wanted to say, first of all, it's like thanks for conjuring me up for this. We've been here before multiple times, so I appreciate coming back again. It is a good time to go back and talk, so I'm glad you brought me in. In regards to the TPP stuff, I got nothing, and I'm not going to talk about that, although if you want to say anything about it, go ahead. I didn't even really go anywhere with that, so this is strictly about the net neutrality stuff.
Okay, cool. But the TPP
All right.
stuff, for if people want to find out more about the
Yeah, some of the stuff.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a very secretive NAFTA-like deal. It's NAFTA and steroids. It's for the Pacific, and it's not just for the Pacific. It also affects South and Central America. And there are some new trademark rules and copyright rules that are going to be affected by that. You should definitely look up TPP and copyright, and you should look it in the news section. You'll probably find out some stories that just recently broke. But go ahead. You wanted to talk about what's going on.
And I really wanted to go into that, but this, the whole net neutrality thing is its own world, and it's it's enough dazzling, nightmarish stuff to deal with it at any one point. So, and I was just even looking at some of the buzzwords and phrases that I was going through recently, and I was like throwing my mind into a tizzy. Stuff like VOD, video on demand, fast lanes, throttling, cutting the cable cord, Title I, Title II, death as a bundle. I'm like, oh my God, where do I begin? But I think that I'd like to begin by just saying that I think that we're all in a good country because the citizenry here is participating. We have some kind of participatory democracy, it looks like, because the FCC released its second batch of comments. There were it was basically 2.5 million public comments in the second period of comments that was opened in the summer in regards to net neutrality, and that and combined with the first period, which is when I actually put my 2 cents in, we're at about 3.9 million comments, which is more. It was a record for any comment period in the FCC's history. It eclipses the prior record by Janet Jackson's 2004 wardrobe failure. So that's good. I'm glad that we're talking more about that than Janet Jackson's boobs.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I'm really disappointed in the American public. I thought they'd make more comments about boobs. I really.
They by more than twice. So that's the kind of country you live in, Chuck. If you didn't know it before, now you do.
Very disappointing.
There was an angle that I was getting from you and from Mr. Jerry that sounded more like you thought that Waxman was kind of nutty, or that all the Dems are nutty about what they were saying, or that they were kowtowing to the Republicans. I'm not really sure where you're getting that. Hello, what's that noise?
Hello? Yeah, I'm doing fine. What's going on your end?
I heard that, and I don't know what that was.
Whatever.
Did you hear that?
Nope.
Did you hear like a... Okay, anyhow, can you give me your angle on why they're kowtowing to the Republicans before I go further? I was actually going to just march through some stuff in chronological order, but do you want to pipe up first? Or
No. I want to hear. I want to hear yours because my information on this is scant at best, and I'm hoping that you will.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that you will be able to tell me,
we'll
alleviate my fears.
All right. Well, maybe we'll do that right now then. Maybe. Probably not, though. You'll have new fears, Chuck.
Sweet.
All right. So let's go. On October 3rd, Henry Waxman, the Democrat from California sent a letter to the ex-telecom flunky and current FCC chairman Tom Wheeler and told him that he wanted to reclassify broadband under Title II, which is the common carrier section of the Act. But he said that Title II is not enough. And he's probably right about that because it already allows for tiered services in telecoms. So that's kind of weird. Under Section 201 and 202 covering reasonable rates and unjust discrimination, it's actually likely or possible that the broadband peoples could argue that it is reasonable to charge you more, or that you should be throttled, or that we should be able to give other services more access. Under those rules, the 201 and 202, it's kind of fuzzy because, again, it's already happening in telecoms that there is a tiered service. So he's worried about just going Title II. And since he says he wants to use Section 706 under Title I, which gives them big powers to create kind of rules inside of that.
Because Title II was supposed to be the solution to solving any potential of net neutrality.
It's considered the more strict of the two sections, or two title areas.
Right.
And the sections within it are kind of weird and do allow for some weirdness.
So the solution of putting them in and making them Section 2, that doesn't really help out the situation at all because they're
not completely, according to Waxman.
Okay.
But there are other arguments. But let me continue though. But you got it. You're on with me so far. And
yes.
I know I forgive everybody, or forgive me, everybody, for going this deep into the weeds. It's really, it's kind of hairy.
Yeah,
but anyhow, let's go.
Yeah.
Under 706, which is under Title I, there are powers in there too, which he believes can be used to bar throttling or fast lanes, and to waive essentially 201 and 202, which are in Title II. So he thinks a combination of using Title I and Title II is the best solution, and so he sent his letter to the ex-telecom flunky and current FCC chairman Tom Wheeler and gave him his 2 cents. On October 22nd, Anna Eshoo, another Dem from California, see a pattern? She spoke to the ex-telecom flunky, current FCC chairman Tom Wheeler, and said that she wants to reclassify broadband, again, under Title II, as a common carrier, but she suggests using forbearance within Title II to selectively squelch these two weird sections, 201 and 202. And then you ask yourself, what the hell is forbearance? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
Well, let me tell you. Forbearance normally means to restrain oneself from doing something. You knew that already.
Right.
But did you know that the FCC has a unique power within the government of forbearance under Section 10 of the 1996 Telecommunications Act? So we're going deeper into the weeds.
Wow.
But under that section, the FCC does not necessarily have to enforce laws or various parts unless they're considered needed to protect consumers or generally to ensure the public good. How crazy is that?
I love that the Clinton administration came up with the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that has within it, there's this rule in here that says that we don't have to actually do
we don't
anything.
Have to follow anything.
Exactly. Our reform is nothing.
Nah. Earlier than Anna Eshoo's note, the Democrat from California, Zoe Lofgren, who, guess what, is a Democrat from California, also sent a letter to the ex-telecom flunky, current FCC chairman Tom Wheeler. And he also, or she, I'm not sure which it is, also argued for a mix of Title II and forbearance. So Obama's already made it clear that he's all over, and he said he's unequivocally committed to net neutrality, and that, Wheeler knows my position. And Tom Wheeler has just on October 17th noted that the ex-telecom flunky, current FCC chairman Tom Wheeler, agreed with the president's position. So even though he's an independent, on the table, it's kind of clear that Obama wants him to kind of do something, and Tom Wheeler's kind of saying, I kind of hear you. But we don't know if that means anything either yet, because we're still in this state, and we're in this period of public comment, and then they're going to react to that stuff.
That is...
And he can either change his position completely, who knows, or he'll stay with the kooky one he started with in May, and that started this whole problem. Well, actually, it goes way before that. Again, it goes back to, we know this, it goes back to Roosevelt. He started the whole thing. FDR is the real problem. But we won't go back that far. But the future may look bright. Do you know that the cable cutting may save net neutrality? Did you think about that?
You know,
Did you think that capitalism might actually save net neutrality?
You know what I do think is that before it was
Forget about these stupid, crazy Dems from California.
it was a debate over should there
It
be
could
net
be
neutrality
Netflix.
or not, and now it has become a debate over how do we rein in net neutrality. And it's really fascinating that when they try to rein it in, they keep finding rules that make it so it won't be reined in, especially when you find those rules within the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which, as I was saying earlier,
Well,
Bill
that actually
Clinton is
allows
now
them to
regretting.
rein them in.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I disagree with you. That rule actually allows them to do just the opposite of what you just said.
Right,
It
but-
could allow them to rein it in their own way,
Or
just
not.
by not doing things.
Right, exactly. It's bizarre. That is really bizarre. It's just good that they've got to the point where they're trying to figure out how to rein it in, not arguing over if they're going to have net neutrality or not.
I think that there is a general consensus around the world right now, and certainly in America and in the punditry and the web-sphere, that there seems to be some movement towards the position of net neutrality.
And the other
But
thing I don't
beyond that, again, I want to go back to how Netflix and Hulu and HBO and CBS are going to save us all.
Right, go
You want
ahead.
to know more about that?
Yeah, because I read about this. Go
Because
ahead.
that's the real solution. You know that 47% of the American households right now subscribe to Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime Instant, or some combination?
Yeah.
47%.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. So we already have this thing where Netflix kind of started it. They're the ones that went out there first that maybe showed the way when they decided to start offering their services online at $8 a month. Just recently, HBO announced its Go service that will occur in 2015, and CBS followed them by saying that they're going to start throwing out a $6 per month offer. All of these are services that are online, have nothing to do with a cable, the cable cutters. So HBO, CBS, Showtime, Netflix, Amazon, and the rest have more than enough money to lobby for net neutrality, and they will be. Because they all want an equal share of that wire.
Yeah.
That pipe.
Yeah, I saw the article about HBO cutting the cable cord, and all of a sudden I started thinking, oh, this is not good news for the other stations that happen to be on those cable services, because those are the reasons why people are subscribing to cable.
Yeah, the bundling thing is over.
Yeah.
And that means crap is got to run for the hills.
Yeah.
But that also means, like, how does that really work? Yeah, you're really getting to the crux of this, too. It's like, are these services really going to work at these levels, or what are they going to offer? Or you're getting into yet another level with this, which I don't want to address too much because I think those are salient and really pertinent issues. But I don't know how they're going to play out. But I do know that the market seems to be arcing towards a cutting of the cable.
You know, and I hate cable companies, and I would love to see them go out of business. I don't want to see people lose their jobs, but I would love to see cable companies go out of business. But I know that the second that cable goes away, I'll be complaining about how the news service isn't as good as cable was.
Or again, that's why I tell, right? Because,
Right.
yeah, we're not just, this is no solution. It's just another nightmare we're going into.
Exactly.
And I can't even fathom where that's heading, and I don't even want to think about it right now.
Right, exactly. All right, Laddie, so you got a website of the week?
In the meantime, I'd like to help everyone towards a Halloween, and on that nightmarish note, I'd like to remind people that it is near Halloween, and in that light, in that vein, if you excuse the pun, I would like to offer up the Mutter Museum, which is at muttermuseum.org, I believe. I've already forgotten, but it's already posted at the thisishell.com site, and will be over at the Facebooks within seconds. So look for that. If you're looking for some kind of inspiration for creepy, the Mutter Museum will give it to you.
Where is the Mutter Museum besides for being online?
It is in Philadelphia. Are you aware of the Mutter?
That sounds familiar.
I would have thought you'd know much about this already. I certainly have visited this. I went once with Kristen and Austra. We all went there and freaked out. It's really a great and horrible place. Go take a look.
All right.
And you'll see what I'm talking about. It's nightmarish. It is really, but it's all real stuff. It's really about the Philadelphia surgeons who, for a century or more, have been putting their most freakish things in a collection, and so it's world-class freak.
Sweet.
Freak out.
All right, so the website...
You'll love it. You'll love it.
The website of the week this week is mootermuseum.com. Thank you very much, Laddie. Talk to you soon.
No, that's not .com. It's .org,
.org.
and I may be wrong about that. Even it's certainly an org, not a com, but I believe it is mootermuseum.org. And again, if you really want to get it right, go look at the This Is Hell area of Facebooks, which will have it correct.
Or go
Don't trust us.
And go to thisishell.com. You can find it there.
Or thisishell.com. It's definitely there for sure right now.
All right. Talk to you soon, Laddie.
To scare the hell out of you.
Yeah.
All right.
This is Hell every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. I was mentioning before we went to Laddie's segment. Let me get it. mootermuseum.org, I believe it is his website of the week. You can find it over our Facebook page. You can find it at thisishell.com. Let me write that down over here so I don't forget later on this morning's show. Mooter Museum, WSOW. All right, so after the attacks... yes, sir?
Oh, sorry. Don't go to that website.
Why? Is it gross?
There's like a sweet potato growing out of a man's head. Don't go to that website. No one go to that website.
So it's literally Mr. Potato Head, the guy who inspired the toy?
I would not give this to children.
So, on this week, there were the attacks that happened in Ottawa, happened over at the War Memorial. Let me clear my throat for a second. Happened over at the War Memorial, also in Parliament. I have the volume down on CNN International. I'm talking to Alex about this week's show, and all of a sudden I see big flashing letters like I was just about to have a seizure. Big flashing words popping on the screen, flying at me. Attacks on Ottawa. And then the next chyron that floats across the bottom of the screen is Obama. We must stay vigilant. Now, first of all, why do we have to stay vigilant about terror attacks in Ottawa? I'm really not too sure. Anyway. Then the very next, this is like maybe a 15-second period of time. Attacks on Ottawa. Obama, we must stay vigilant. And then suddenly, they show a ceremonial, a person in Canadian Parliament in ceremonial garb. And he's walking with his weird bell and his weird 18th century hat and his wig. And it says in big letters underneath that, innocence lost. Yes, the innocence of Canada. The country that stole first Canadian children from their homes and put them in reprogramming schools up until 1996. Oh, the beautiful innocence of Canada that is ripping up Alberta and the Lake Athabasca area so it looks like Mordor in order to get tar sands while destroying the lands of the indigenous people there. Oh, the innocence of Canada has finally been lost. Wow, I hate watching CNN. Granted, CNN International is better. I even saw a Christiane Amanpour episode this week where they talked about how CNN in the U.S. shows so many Islamophobic people going on Islamophobic rants and asking people on CNN International, does this surprise you to see this on CNN in the U.S.? So they don't show, I pointed this out before, they don't show the same thing on CNN International as they show on CNN in the U.S. CNN International has no place for Islamophobes. That's for CNN in the United States. There's an interview that we did earlier this fall, I think it was the first week of September, that has had a major impact on people who work on this show, and it's really surprised me. I thought it would be any number of other interviews that we did on this show, maybe even the Zizek interview, maybe the Arundhati Roy interview. But no, the interview that really has had an amazing impact on the staff of This Is Hell, believe it or not, is our interview that we did first week of September with Steve Almond about his book Against Football, One Fan's Reluctant Manifesto. I have to say that during the interview, I was already predisposed to wanting to find an excuse, find a rationalization, have somebody tell me, like a fatherly figure almost, tell me, quit watching football. These are the problems with watching football. Whether it's the brutality of the game, whether it's the athlete industry complex that raises kids so they might be illiterate once they get out of college. They might not have the skills once they get out of college to find a regular job, and they're just used as athletes. The way that Steve Almond especially talked about the racism and the sexism, the way that an NFL combine looks so much like a slave auction is really creepy. And the sexism that you see of women relegated to the sidelines as cheerleaders, it really is very gross. The CTE that's going on. Look what's happening with the assaults that we've had, the violent domestic assaults within football, and how a lot of times those crimes have been covered up in the past by teams. There are so many gross things about American football. That conversation with Steve Almond, again, you got to get this book, Against Football, One Fan's Reluctant Manifesto. That conversation really made me rethink my football consumption. Now, I have always had a problem with the corporate nature of football. I've always had the problem of the way that they exploit the military, the way that they exploit patriotism. This last week, I was watching Fox. I saw the very last, maybe 8 seconds of Fox Football Sunday, NFL Fox Sunday, whatever it's called, with Terry Bradshaw. And the hosts of the show, the 4 co-hosts of the show, walk towards the camera slowly as an American flag unfurls behind them. So their exploitation of patriotism, their exploitation of the United States of the United States of America brand in order to push their product is really gross. The way that the United States military spends millions of dollars every year, tens of millions of dollars likely every year, flying planes over, that's completely unnecessary. There are so many things that are about it that just really sicken me. So in the past, I'd already been on my own personal boycott of never buying any product that has any kind of NFL licensing on it, never buying any product that I've actually seen advertised during an NFL game. I'd be in a store and I'd say, you know what? I want to get this, beer. Oh, yeah, but I saw that on an NFL game, and I'm not going to drink that beer because they show it during NFL. They have an advertisement during the NFL games. So it really led me to rethinking my football consumption. And I have consumed a lot less football this year. I'm still gambling on football, but that's because I gamble. I've got a gambling problem. I don't have a football problem. I got a gambling problem. So I still gamble on football, but I'm hardly watching as much as I have in the past, and it's because of this interview I did with Steve Almond. My football consumption is probably down 70% this year. So then I get an email from one of our correspondents, Chris Bigosinski. He tells me the exact same thing. After he heard the Steve Almond interview, he is done with football. He's like, I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. I'm sickened by the way that they treat the players, the athletes, the kids who play that game, and the physical conditions that they have to go through. This is absurd, and it's disgusting. I'm sick of it. So he's boycotted football for the year. I saw Dan Litchfield, who does the alternate current on our show, another one of our correspondents. I saw him on Wednesday during Polish Tuesday at Carrie's Lounge, and he told me the exact same thing. He is boycotting football because he heard the interview with Steve Almond on his book, Against Football, One Fan's Reluctant Manifesto. Dan also said that he is still gambling on football, but he is not, I shouldn't say gambling, he's playing fantasy football with his friends, but he said that he's watched maybe 10 minutes in total of football so far this year. So of all of the interviews to have an impact on the staff of this show, I am shocked to find out it was the interview with Steve Almond about his book, Against Football, One Fan's Reluctant Manifesto. So if you do know somebody who watches a lot of football, maybe too much football, I would suggest you buy this book from him next year, and that way they'll watch, or this year, and that way they'll watch less football next year. All right. I was just mentioning Carrie's. This week is a non-show week for This Is Hell. That is, we're not on at all next Saturday because of special marathon sports programming next week. So that means next Saturday, no This Is Hell at all. This coming week will be the first non-show week where I'm staying in town in years, and it's my first non-show week since our offices have moved into their new home above Carrie's Lounge, 2251 West Devon. So I want to take the time and opportunity this week to hang out with you, our listening audience, to meet and greet, to think and drink, to talk, hear what you want to hear on This Is Hell. Maybe Ryan can finally come in and buy me that beer. Wednesday, I'll be hanging out downstairs from our office at Carrie's Lounge, again, 2251 West Devon, for Polish Tuesday. You may be asking yourself, why is Polish Tuesday on Wednesday? So here's what happened. Proprietor Pete Valavanis was tending bar one day, decided that he would serve Polish sausage every Tuesday. So he says to his very classy clientele, I'm going to start Polish Tuesday, where I'll serve Polish sausages. He then made the mistake of asking his clientele, when should I start? At which point somebody said, Wednesday. So that's why Polish Tuesday is on Wednesday. So I'll be hanging out there from like 4 to 7 p.m. on Wednesday for Polish Tuesday. Then on Devil's Night, as we call it in Detroit, October 30th, that's Thursday, there's a Goose Island Tap Takeover that is going to feature both their Rambler and Sticky Fingers IPAs, of course the Green Line, and what I really want to try, the Muddy Imperial Stout. So you can join me for that as well. You can drop by Carrie's on Wednesday again for Polish Tuesday from 4 to 7 p.m. or after 7 p.m., drop by Carrie's Lounge on Wednesday or on Thursday. What is that date? October 30th to join me for the Goose Island Tap Takeover. So here's the other weird thing. Next Sunday, November 2nd, I'll also be dropping by Carrie's because get this, the Windy City Rollers roller derby team will be watching their teammates compete in the International Roller Derby Championships, which Carrie's will be showing again. That's Sunday night. So Wednesday and Thursday, drop by Carrie's and hang out with me. If you're looking for a Halloween party, there's a band and karaoke at Carrie's on Friday, and join me for some roller derby action on Sunday. With next week off, I really want to take this opportunity to meet and greet with all of you, our listeners, to hear what you think and, well, to hear what you want to hear on This Is Hell. So drop by 2251 West Devon on Wednesday during Polish Tuesday from 4 to 7 p.m. On Thursday during the Goose Island Tap Takeover night, or next Sunday afternoon and evening when I'll be watching the International Roller Derby Championships. I really want to take this opportunity. I have a week off where I don't have to do the show next Saturday, and I really want to take this opportunity to get your input. If you have ideas for the show, you can always send them to Chuck at thisishell.com. Chuck at thisishell.com. Don't forget, again, our question from hell for you, our listening audience this week. You must reply during today's show. We'll be giving out 2 copies of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change, to the people who post the 2 best answers to this week's question from hell. How do white people, or how do you, if you are white, benefit from white entitlement? All you have to do is go to the This Is Hell Facebook page and post your comment now. If you want to know about more about Naomi's book, all you have to go to is thischangeseverything.org. By the way, Naomi Klein is going to be here in town. I'll be telling you about that in a little bit, as well as where you can see the new Laura Poitras film, which is called Citizen 4, and I'll be speaking about that. Right around now, this week, the U.S. Dirty Wars finally faced justice as Blackwater contractors were found guilty in a 2007 massacre. Here to tell us why the real people behind these crimes will never face justice is Academy Award nominee, 2-time George Polk Book Award winner, and co-founding editor of The Intercept, investigative reporter, war correspondent, author of Dirty Wars, Jeremy Scahill. Good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning, I'm here.
Oh, there you go. It was our technical end. Jeremy will be speaking at the 35th Annual Dinner Celebration for Chicago Area Peace Action. It's a dinner and conversation with Jeremy Scahill, and it takes place next Saturday, November 1st at 6 p.m. at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Gym at 549 9th Street in Wilmette. Tickets for just the program start at $20, and for the dinner start at $75. For more information, visit Chai Peace Action. That's CHI peaceaction.org. Jeremy, I seriously doubt that you remember this, and to tell you the truth, I don't remember it either, but apparently you were on the show like 13 years ago, and I do not remember that conversation, so I apologize.
Had you been drinking at the time? No, I actually, because it has such a distinct name, I remember, I'm pretty sure that I was driving in a car at the time that we spoke, but I definitely know that I've been on this show before.
I know it too, and I found, see, that's the funny part, is I found an old rundown that said Jeremy Scahill, and then I was like, I know he's been on this. So anyway, we were speaking earlier with Doug Henwood about his piece in Harper's on Hillary Clinton, where Doug doesn't see much difference between the Republican and Democratic foreign policy platforms, except maybe the Republicans may go isolationist, while Hillary could go even more militant. We've been talking about this lack of difference since the 2000 presidential debate on foreign policy between Gore and Bush, when Jim Lehrer was asking, is there anywhere you two disagree? The conversation has really taken off over the last few months because we've been talking to Tufts University's Michael J. Glennon about the national security state, our double government of national security policymakers who never change, thus giving the U.S. a consistent foreign policy that does not change ever. So will the dirty wars end? Can they end? Are they on autopilot? And is some isolationist Republican more likely to at least reel in the dirty wars than Hillary would?
Well, I mean, the short answer is no. I think that what's happened really since the era of Ronald Reagan is that when it comes to American, what they now are calling national security policy, you could call it also sort of offensive war policy. It's been consistent from one administration to the next, and it's all of the excesses have sort of built on each other. And the role that the Democrats have played has been to sort of try to clean up the image of America around the world while continuing or sort of rubber stamping or legitimizing the policies of their Republican predecessors. And I think that the enduring legacy of Barack Obama when it comes to foreign policy is that he is going to be viewed as the man who ensured that some of the most abusive, outrageous policies of the Bush era were codified into actual standing U.S. policy. And what I mean by that is that when Barack Obama was a senator, when he was running for the nomination to be the Democratic candidate for president, he talked a good game about civil liberties, about American foreign policy. It was pretty clear that he was no radical leftist or some big anti-war guy, but his politics definitely energized a lot of young people who had basically grown up in the shadow of 9/11, and that was their entire existence. Was overshadowed by the fact that the country that they lived in was in a permanent state of war. And then Obama gets into office, and he surrounds himself with Clinton-era hawks, including Hillary Clinton, who was one of the most aggressive secretaries of state in modern U.S. history, probably second only to Henry Kissinger in terms of militarizing what is supposed to be one of the top diplomatic posts in the U.S. government. And at the end of the day, I think that what Obama did was to try to put a new label or a new branding on the Bush-Cheney policies and then run with them around the globe, and at the same time pick up a Nobel Peace Prize and claim that he sort of changed the way that the U.S. does its foreign policy. At the end of the day, I think that Obama has made it so that whoever the next president is going to have a lot of latitude to continue waging these dirty wars. And I don't buy the notion that an isolationist Republican, first of all, is going to win the office of the presidency, but second, would actually radically change anything. Just look what's happening with Rand Paul. Go back 2 years ago, Rand Paul was, basically like his father on foreign policy, Ron Paul, where he was pretty much an isolationist. Now, Rand Paul is popping up with all sorts of justifications for various wars and critiquing President Obama for not fighting war in the right way or being tough enough. Once you get polished and ready for the big game, they pretty much strip you of anything that vaguely resembles a principle.
Well, that's an incredibly depressing answer, and that's why you're on This Is Hell, Jeremy. One of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking is the way in which the Obama administration is continuing the Bush administration programs. They're actually putting those programs on steroids, and you see, unfortunately, with Barack Obama, for instance, President Obama, his approval ratings were dropping and dropping, and then he got a little bit of a slight uptick once he said that he was going to start the bombing campaign against ISIS. My real fear, Jeremy, isn't that people don't know about the dirty wars that the United States is engaged in. My real fear is that if they did know about them, they would support them. How popular do you think, how much of the reason that we have these dirty wars going on right now is that they're actually popular with the American public?
Well, I mean, I think you're making an excellent point, and I agree with you. The issue, though, is are they being presented with the reality of what that war is about and who the so-called enemy actually is, or are they being presented with what is essentially a very neatly packaged piece of propaganda? And if you look at who our so-called enemies have been in recent years, it was Al Qaeda, and then Osama bin Laden gets killed, and then we find it's Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, this group in Yemen, and then Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, it continues to be who it was 5 years ago, but then we need a new enemy, so we say, oh, here's ISIS. And then for a while they had this thing called the Khorasan Group, and there was this great one night I was watching NBC Nightly News, which I don't often do, and Brian Williams was anchoring, and right next to him, was this huge graphic on the TV, and it just says, the new enemy, and it's I was sort of joking around with Amy Goodman about this not too long ago, saying like we could roll that out basically like every year or every few months and sort of make it an American holiday where we just sort of present the new enemy. So I don't think it's that Americans, are sort of love war or think, hey, we're doing the right thing in the world, around the world by engaging in all these bombing campaigns. We have lazy journalists who are being fed propaganda by Republicans and Democrats alike and are sort of just repeating that propaganda. This was something that was very clear when Bush was in office, and it remains true when Obama's in office. But I disagree, not saying that you're saying it in such an oversimplified way, but I don't agree with the notion that if the American people were presented with the actual facts of who we're fighting against, what the reasons we're fighting against them actually are, and what threat they actually pose, I do not believe that most Americans would support it either morally or perhaps, to make a bread and butter argument, financially. And at the end of the day, the thesis of my reporting over the past 15 years has been that we're helping to create the very threat that we claim to be fighting because of our aggressive, offensive foreign policy against relatively minor threats in the scheme of things. Our overreaction and our ultra-militarized response to the slightest whiff of something we can vaguely define as terrorism ends up fueling the very terrorism that we're told that they're fighting against in our names.
So kicking ass sells, but when you tell people why the war that you're going to engage in and why you're engaging that war and who you're targeting, that would undo it, right?
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, as they say in Star Wars, the power of the Force is fierce. I mean, there's a conspiracy in this country that no longer requires sort of white men with cigars smoking in a back room cutting a deal.
Right.
The conspiracy is that corporations already sort of are in control of everything. And it's sort of we kind of have a shadow parallel government, but it's not like the Illuminati or the Bilderberg Group are sort of running the world. It's become its own beast to the point where there was a sort of silent coup in this country where corporations and corporate interests just by default are going to be the primary beneficiary of whatever policies Democrats or Republicans choose to implement. And part of that has to do with the fact that corporations control our electoral process, and part of it has to do with the fact that the elites in both the Democratic and Republican parties are the same people that are the corporate elites. And so it's not that they're sort of calculating how can we make more money for Boeing and Lockheed Martin and all of these defense contractors. It's that the entire system is rigged so that the only policies that can actually pass are those that will favor the bottom line of corporate profits. And so I don't think that it's just a matter of providing information that's going to change people's minds. The fact is that every single member of Congress is bought and paid for by one private interest or another, and many of them by the same interests. And that's big pharma, it's big defense, it's big oil. It's huge amounts of capital are amassed against the people to ensure that corporations and corporate personhood is something more than just sort of a sick joke at the Supreme Court having to do with campaign finance and interference in elections, but that corporate personhood means that corporations are people above actual human beings, and that's the default policy. So it's not just about information. It's also about the fact that a huge amount of time and money over many, many decades has gone into creating a system that is rigged against the people.
So is the continuation, I shouldn't say is, the continuation of the dirty wars is partly the media's fault. I was talking to somebody who is a telecommunications professor, and I was asking him, why is it that CNN, for instance, I was telling him the difference between CNN and CNN International. I was studying for a couple of weeks, watching both and trying to see what the difference was. And I was asking him, why is it that CNN is so different from CNN International? Why is it that CNN seems to be so pro-war and pro-militant reaction to any challenge that the United States faces around the world? And he said, well, I'm sure that they're watching their Nielsen track ratings and they see that it sells. So is the reason that the media is at least partly at fault for the continuation of the dirty wars simply because they see ratings and capitalism tells them that being patriotic and being for war sells stuff?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. I mean, I think that I think that's sort of what happened after 9/11 when Fox News started to put this huge American flag that was waving on the bottom of the screen, and then this whole sort of symbolism of needing to have the American flag on the lapels of American politicians. And Dan Rather at one point said that he would have been necktied if he had sort of spoken out against the sort of rush to war after 9/11 when he was the anchor of the CBS Evening News. I mean, I think there is some sort of level of basic cowardice that exists at the higher levels of media institutions where they don't want to be perceived as being unpatriotic, and I think to an extent that can impact it. But you're asking something, and part of the reason why I'm kind of stuttering here is because you're asking about ratings, and if you actually want to talk about that, war and patriotism, it doesn't sell. That's not actually what people are gravitating toward on television. What they're gravitating toward is sort of what we're told is called reality TV. More people keep up with the Kardashians than keep up with whatever latest war Obama and his people have gotten us into. And I think that if anything, it's not that we're necessarily seeing a glorification of war as a sort of expanding trend on our media. That's always been consistent. I would say we're actually seeing a radical reduction in the coverage of American wars, even if it's ultra patriotic or pseudo patriotic or whatever, and that what you're seeing on CNN and Fox and MSNBC is starting to look a hell of a lot like what you're seeing on Bravo with the Real Housewives of New Jersey. So I actually think that if you look at Ted Koppel, who was the founder and longtime anchor of a show on ABC that young people in your audience probably never saw called Nightline. That was a show that was remarkable. I mean, it had its problems. We used to joke that it was White Line because they would only ever interview white people, but it was started out of the hostage crisis in Iran, where the U.S. Embassy was seized by students who participated in overthrowing a U.S.-backed dictatorship in Iran. And Nightline, which was on network television, this was before cable news. It was on like any television box that you turned on anywhere that you could see this show. It was a huge deal before cable to have a network show. And for an hour every night, Ted Koppel and all of these great international reporters at ABC News were covering this amazing, incredible story. And then the show stayed on the air, and it was probably the most serious show on television. Why was that show taken off the air? The show was taken off the air because no advertisers wanted to support it anymore. Ted Koppel was patriotic, in according to their definition. Ted Koppel was waving the flag big time, whenever America got into a war. He also was a good reporter when he didn't have to sort of stand up and be a spokesperson for the government. No one wanted to watch it, or everyone wanted to watch it, but no advertisers wanted to support it. So who wins? The audience who says this is a great show and the ratings are high, or advertisers who say, I don't want to sell my product next to a report about a kid getting blown up somewhere. So you understand what I'm saying? Like, I think that's more, if you want a real lesson in idiocy on television, watch Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski on MSNBC, and I've been on that show many times. I mean, that is where America goes to get the dumbest, lowest common denominator version of whatever happens to be happening around the globe.
Yeah, one thing I just want to back up what you were saying about Nightline is that Nightline consistently had more than twice the ratings of The Tonight Show and The Late Show combined.
Correct.
Whatever the CBS and NBC competition was, they would have more than twice the ratings, and they couldn't even bill a quarter of any one of those two shows because they simply couldn't get advertisers.
Exactly. So that's the point I'm making, is that, in response to what
Right.
your previous guest said, it's not that I don't think that plays a role.
Right.
It's that it doesn't. War doesn't sell, and a lot of advertisers don't want their products being advertised when there's something depressing on television. They want to hit that sweet demographic of people, who are at the prime of their working life, that are sort of urban working people or people with a compulsive need to spend. So they're and are sitting at home on computers. They're targeting certain individuals. It's not just like that they want everybody. If most of the country is watching a particular show, that doesn't necessarily mean advertisers want to do it. Who is watching that show? That's why when you watch CNN during the day, you will see an extraordinary number of Viagra advertisements. Why is that? Because the advertisers have studied who's watching those shows
Right.
at that time, and they're targeting it to men in an age group with erectile dysfunction. It's not because they just Viagra decided they're going to buy advertising at 1:30. No. People spent a lot of money to do a study figuring out when is the best time to sell Viagra on television and what is the best channel to do it on, and that's what they're doing it. So I'm sure they're targeting the Senate, basically.
And another great example of that is golf on TV. Golf historically gets horrible ratings. The only time it ever got good ratings was with Tiger Woods, but it gets horrible ratings. So why is it on every Saturday and Sunday afternoon? Because they bill incredibly high, because the target audience for golf is people who have tons of money. So you can get really big advertisers like Porsche or whoever to be on during a golf show. So it's more about the revenue that they create, not just the ratings numbers. We are speaking with Jeremy Scahill. He is a producer and writer of the award-winning film Dirty Wars. The book of that same title just came out in a paperback version last month. He is going to be speaking at the 35th annual dinner celebration for Chicago Area Peace Action. It's a dinner and conversation with Jeremy Scahill, and it takes place next Saturday, November 1st at 6 p.m. at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Gym at 549 9th Street in Wilmette. Tickets for just the program start at $20, and for the dinner start at $75. For more information, visit ChiPeaceAction.org. That's CHI peaceaction.org. I want to talk to you about your article, your most recent writing, your post this week at The Intercept. Blackwater founder remains free and rich while his former employees go down on murder charges. On the Blackwater guilty verdict, Ronald Machin, U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and said in a statement, "This verdict is a resounding affirmation of the commitment of the American people to the rule of law, even in times of war." 7 years ago, these Blackwater contractors unleashed powerful sniper fire, machine guns, and grenade launchers on innocent men, women, and children. Today, they were held accountable for that outrageous attack and its devastating consequences for so many Iraqi families. And here's a quote from the AP on the verdict. One of those struck by gunfire in the shootings, Hassan Jabir, said in Baghdad that, quote, "At last we are hearing good news where justice has been achieved and Blackwater will receive their punishment." How much is this a victory for justice when it comes to the Iraq War? And do you think there will be any lingering impact, any legacy of this decision, maybe more oversight when it comes to military contractors in the future?
Well, on a micro level, this is a very important verdict because it's the first time that private security contractors, I prefer the term mercenaries, have been held accountable in any criminal form for killing civilians under the auspices of the so-called War on Terror. And this was the single largest known massacre of civilians committed by any private security entity that we're aware of. And the fact is that there were many men that were involved with the shooting that day as part of a Blackwater team called Raven 23, and they systematically gunned down 17 Iraqi civilians. They were tried for the deaths of 14 of them, but there were 17 Iraqi civilians killed, including children and an Iraqi medical student and his wife. And I know many of the personal stories of the people who were killed that day because I've talked to their family members, and it would be hard to exaggerate the level of horror that was present in this in the square that day. I mean, one guy, Mohammed Kanani, whose 9-year-old son was killed, described it to me. He said it was like the end of days, and just shooting bullets everywhere. And then so one man who was killed early on in the shooting, they just kept repeatedly going back to him as they would shoot other people. Then they would come back and shoot his corpse. He was just completely riddled with rounds fired by these guys. But there were many other people than the 4 men who were on trial there that were responsible for this massacre. One other guy, he pled out earlier to a lesser charge and then was a key witness against his fellow colleagues. But I'm not just talking about the guys in the square. This was a company, Blackwater, that was created by a neo-crusader who is a radical Christian supremacist named Eric Prince, who is a billionaire, and he and the other executives at his company set a tone where the killing of Muslims was permissible whether they were combatants or not. And people at Blackwater spoke of teams of operatives flying in helicopters going what they called night hunting, where they literally were shooting Iraqis for sport and using very racist terms to describe Muslims and others, and basically viewed them as Eric Prince once said, as sort of crawling out of the sewers and creating this barbaric threat around the world. And that's the tone that existed at this company. So, I'm glad, and I think it's important that an American jury saw the criminality of that event. But let's be clear here. Eric Prince is still a free man. He just wrote a book, which is a revisionist memoir of his time at the head of Blackwater called Civilian Warriors, and he describes Blackwater as the unsung heroes of the War on Terror. He recently started a new mercenary company called Frontier Services Group, which is backed by huge amounts of Chinese capital, which is interesting given that Prince portrays himself as an ultra-patriot. They're targeting Africa, and he recently suggested on Fox News that Blackwater or other private contractors like that should be used to fight ISIS or respond to Ebola. President Bush isn't going to be held accountable. Dick Cheney won't be held accountable for unleashing mercenary forces around the world. Donald Rumsfeld won't be. You could tell a lot about what's happening in this country by looking at who's in prison and who's on a book tour. When it comes to former officials, people like John Kiriakou, who was a CIA whistleblower, he's in prison. Chelsea Manning, who did WikiLeaks, she's in prison. And yet Jose Rodriguez, the architect of the CIA Black Sites program, he's on book tour. Eric Prince, the head of this Christian Crusader force that gunned down, Iraqi, Afghan, other civilians, he's on book tour. Donald Rumsfeld, Leon Panetta, they're on book tour. Whistleblowers are in jail. Ed Snowden is in exile. So it's a mixed bag. It's a micro victory and very important for the Iraqis who were affected by it, but it's a spit in the ocean of what actually is needed in terms of actual accountability.
But when it comes to actual accountability, I know that you were saying that Eric Prince had said all these horrible things and had created a culture and an environment within Blackwater that would lead to these awful crimes. But the only way that I could see that he would be held accountable is if there was paperwork or some sort of record or evidence that showed that he then ordered this killing or these kinds of killings.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, okay. There's a lot of smoke around Eric Prince and about specific incidents, and there are allegations from whistleblowers within the company that Eric Prince was directly involved with actual specific killings, but those haven't, they haven't been considered valid enough to end up in a court of law. I personally believe that it's Eric Prince as the head of that company and setting a tone in the way that he did publicly within the company, should be held accountable to one degree or another. But when it comes to like linking him to the actual Nicer Square massacre, no, of course he didn't wake up that morning and say, "Hey, go and shoot a bunch of Iraqis in a square." But we also need to look at how do we hold, if companies are people under our laws, then why can't they get the death penalty the way that so many poor African Americans do who can't afford big lawyers? And so when I say accountable for Erik Prince, I mean it in a greater sense than simply was he involved with the Nicer Square killing. It's what did his company do under his leadership in a systematic, provable, documentable way.
Just a couple more questions for you, Jeremy. I know you got to go. There's a new movie coming out this weekend in New York and next weekend here in Chicago by your colleague at The Intercept, Laura Poitras. Am I pronouncing her last name correctly?
Yes.
All right. I thought it was going to be French, like Poitras.
Poitras. You could call her that. I don't think she would object.
Laura Poitras, called Citizen 4, about U.S. surveillance in general, but Edward Snowden specifically. You're in the movie discussing new disclosures from a new anonymous government source. From what I have heard, the movie argues there is not just more, but much more surveillance done by the U.S. government than reported by Snowden in any and all revelations that he's given out so far. And as the movie wraps up, there's a spine-tingling suggestion at those secrets maybe coming out. What has been the impact, in your opinion, so far to these revelations by Edward Snowden? Because you've seen how they're not talked about on ABC, NBC, CBS News anymore. I'm not seeing a big rollback of government surveillance. I'm not doubting it will be. I'm seriously doubting that it will be an election issue, and the media seems to have grown bored of anything Snowden. So while we now know what happened with surveillance, has anything really changed other than we know that we're being watched?
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with your description of the way it's being handled in the media right now. I mean, one thing that I'll say is that outside of the United States, every Snowden revelation is front page news in countries around the world. So, yes, I agree with you that there's Snowden fatigue here in the sense that, it was like, oh, the new shiny object, and there's this big story, and so it was like everything on the news right away. And then we go back to, whatever new ball of yarn the cats in the American media decide they want to bat around. And you can't blame blame Snowden or blame the journalists who are working with Snowden for the fact that other media outlets don't think it's of interest anymore because they're bored with the story. And I think, this is true on any number of issues in this country. Remember when we were talking about school shootings?
Yeah.
And it was like on the news constantly because it had just happened, and there was this whole debate about how we're going to try to confront, the threat posed by semi-automatic weapons being so readily available and then being used in these school shootings. And then we move on to the next thing, and then we're talking about what's happening in Ferguson. Even though Ferguson still is in a major state of revolt, the media got bored with that and they move on. There are a lot of ordinary people who have dedicated their lives now to responding to the police shooting in Ferguson. Local folks there. And just because there's not cameras there following them around doesn't mean that they're still organizing, working, fighting on these issues. I also would say stay tuned on the Snowden thing because there is a tremendous amount of information that it has not yet come out, that is going to come out. And we've been working on a system to try to really accelerate the pace of making the Snowden archive publicly available. And there's a lot of challenges involved with that, as you can imagine, given that Glenn Greenwald is in Rio, Laura Poitras is in Berlin, and we're trying to figure out a way where we can have more people going through the documents so that we can, in a responsible but public interest-oriented way, put them out. On Laura's film, this is what I'll say to you. I've been involved with this from the very beginning. Glenn called me the night before he left for Hong Kong to tell me that he was going to meet with a new source and thought his life was going to change forever as a result of it. I thought I knew the Snowden story well. I was blown away when I saw Laura's film. Much of it takes place in this hotel room in Hong Kong, and it truly does feel like you're watching a thriller, and you learn an incredible amount about Edward Snowden and who he really is, and it gives lie to a lot of the narrative around him, and it's an incredibly powerful film. And I play a bit role in it, but I kind of cringed when I saw myself in the film. But the all of the other minutes of the film that don't include me are absolutely riveting, and if you think you know the story, you don't, and it's really amazing.
Well, I'm going to be emailing you to try to see if I can get some contact information on Laura, because I would love to have her on the show, because it's opening up here, and I definitely want people to go see it, and I want to do everything I can to promote this movie, because it sounds amazing and it sounds incredibly important. And when you were talking about the way in which the media, I love the idea of them being cats and playing with a ball of yarn, because look at that whole campaign, Jeremy, of hashtag bring back our girls. Now that that's completely ignored, they should start up a new campaign called hashtag bring back our girls, because it's been completely ignored. One last question for you, Jeremy. We've been speaking with Academy Award nominee, two-time George Polk Award winner, co-founding editor of The Intercept, investigative reporter, war correspondent, author.
Enough. Ask the question.
Author of Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield, but I got to plug this, Jeremy. Jeremy will be speaking at the 35th Annual Dinner Celebration for Chicago Area Peace Action. It's a dinner and conversation with Jeremy Scahill, and it takes place Saturday, November 1 at 6 p.m. at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Gym, 549 9th in Wilmette. Tickets start at $20, $75 for the dinner. Find out more at chaipeaceaction.org. One last question for you, Jeremy, and as always, it's the question from hell, the question we hate to ask, you might hate to answer, our audience will hate your response. Erin Dottie Roy was on our show a couple weeks ago. We were talking to her about her book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. In that book, she warns the pernicious nature of corporate foundations, how they will pay for students to be educated in the States and then send them back to their country of origin, where they can do their corporation's neoliberal bidding. She specifically pointed out the Ford Foundation, but I pointed out that the Ford Foundation does some good things, like fun stuff like Democracy Now!, which you work on. When we had Glenn Greenwald on the show, we asked him about critics who pointed out that the person behind First Look Media, which is behind The Intercept, Pierre Omidyar, has political connections that some have found suspect, specifically his relationship with the new Ukrainian government. But Glenn pointed out that there is no impact by management on editorial content. So when it comes to corporate foundations and financial support from those who may not share your political views, should we take all the rope they're offering us, and will we end up hanging them or ourselves?
No, I mean, I think you need to be really careful. Look, I mean, if you had told me, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, that I would be working at a media outlet with a sole funder who was the founder of eBay and one of the 100 and whatever richest person in the world, I would have told you that you're smoking crack.
Right.
But I look, I read a lot of the criticism of First Look Media. And I think it's good. I mean, I think it's really important that people are vigilant in not just holding public officials accountable, but holding journalists accountable. And I don't just dismiss all criticism or concerns. I actually take very seriously, if it's not some wacko ad hominem thing, but it's someone raising serious issues. I'll look at it. I mean, there are aspects of what Pierre Omidyar does that I'm totally opposed to politically. He's engaged in all sorts of neoliberal economic initiatives around the world that I don't agree with and have criticized for years throughout my life. So if we were working for a media organization where that part of who Pierre Omidyar was or is had some impact on our journalism directly, I would quit in an instant. If there was ever a moment where Pierre said, I don't want you to report on this, I would quit. It wouldn't be that I would have an argument. I would say, I am done. I'm not working here. So that's never happened. And if it does, I assure you that certainly Glenn, Laura Poitras, and myself the next day, we will not be working there anymore because we'll walk out. But we've got no indication that's going to happen. And the only thing I would say, and I think the criticism is great, the only thing I would say to people is we're all in media right now, and I'm sure this is true, Chuck, with you too on your show. You try to figure out how do you sustain your journalism. How do you do it in a way that you have to spend the least amount of time scrambling to raise funds? How do you do it in a way that frees you up to spend almost all of your time doing reporting? And when when Pierre Omidyar got in touch with Glenn Greenwald, at first we thought it was some kind of a joke. And that it wasn't really him. I mean, first of all, I had never heard of him before, but as we talked to him, we realized that he was serious. And don't think for a minute we didn't consider all these questions. We did. But how do you fund independent media? Do you get grants? Do you do it entirely on donations? Do you sell advertising? Do you have a sole funder? Do you have a sort of mixed economy with how you do it? These are all questions we're dealing with. There's an existential threat facing independent journalism right now, and we're in an experiment that certainly has its flaws and its downsides, but we're trying to see if this works, and maybe it won't work. But right now, I think it is working. We had some bumps in the road, but we're not going into this blind. We would never allow someone, because of the fact that they're our funder, to influence our journalism. And you can go to the bank with that one with me. I will quit in an instant if that ever changes.
Jeremy, it has really been a pleasure having you back on This Is Hell. People got to go see Jeremy on Saturday, November 1st at the Chicago Peace Action 35th Annual Dinner Celebration. Find out more at chaipeaceaction.org. Also, check out Jeremy's book, Dirty Wars, which just came out in paperback in September. Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield. You can find out more by going to dirtywars.org. Really a pleasure having you on the air. Huge mistake that I have your email address, so I'll be bugging you in the future.
No problem. And I'll definitely tell Laura to do the show.
All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Jeremy.
All right, cool. Good talking with you.
Good talking with you. Take care. This is Hell every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. Let me repeat that one more time. Jeremy Scahill will be speaking at the 35th Annual Dinner Celebration for Chicago Area Peace Action. It's a dinner and conversation with Jeremy Scahill, and it takes place next Saturday, November 1st at 6 p.m. at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Gym at 549 9th Street in Wilmette. Tickets for just the program start at $20. For the dinner, not $75. More information, go to chaipeaceaction.org. I should really go to this. They've invited me to be like a special guest there and be able to go for free and stuff. But unfortunately, a friend of mine who I haven't seen in years is going to be in town that night. I wonder if I could get to this, get back to my place by 8 so I can start partying with him. I got to think about this. You were going to say something, Alex?
It was just funny that Jeremy ended by saying that, as he said, and I'm sure you guys as journalists too deal with the fact that you want to spend as little time as possible raising funds. Well, we have it all figured out, Jeremy.
Yeah, we
just do everything for free.
Exactly.
Funds?
Hey, journalists? We're journalists? Wait a second. I'm surprised to learn that as well. Hey, did we get any more responses from the question from hell?
Yeah, I'm also just warning you that Kevin just let me know on Facebook that he has a nose cold. So okay, yeah, let me move over my mic.
You want to win Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change? Then have one of the top 2 answers to this week's question from hell. This week's question from hell was prompted by our interview with Kevin Alexander Gray on This Is Hell last week. By the way, that interview, I really, really enjoyed that interview with Kevin Alexander Gray. His response to the question from hell about if the NRA is behind all fear in the United States was fantastic. Our question from hell this week, how do white people, or how do you, if you are white, benefit from white entitlement? David said, you won't know until you're treated like a plantation owner by the black retail clerks in St. Louis. Oof. And Summer said, I haven't been shot by the police. Alex?
So we have 3. We have Kate, who said, if I disappear, someone will come find my white ass. We have Rich, who said, white entitlement, it gives me something to be comfortably smug about. And Matt, who you know, said, neither the host or I had to learn how to play a musical instrument. We could have been the next Jose Feliciano, Brother Ray, or joined the Blind Boys of Alabama.
That is my brother, who is also legally blind.
Oh, is he also blind too?
It's worse.
Wow.
His vision is far worse. Yeah, it was like a really rare thing that 2 people in the same family would have optic nerve myalgia. And so doctors from throughout the Midwest would come look at us every 6 months and run all these tests. Our childhood was torture.
I'd also add one that I'm not going to write down and put on the record because I'm looking for jobs. But I would say probably one of those things is paranoialess weed smoking.
Weed smoking and weed carrying. Well, you still get paranoid, but you still get paranoid. So anyway, top 2 responses to the question from hell will win a copy of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change. You can find out more about that book by going to thischangeseverything.org. So far, our leaders are Kate and Rich. Looks like you 2 are getting those 2 copies. We're going to save. We have one more copy of Naomi Klein's book that we'll be giving out at the Question from Hell on the November 15th show. We'll be telling you what the new Question from Hell is at the end of this morning's show. But for right now, you can still post it on Facebook. Post your response to Our question from hell: how do white people, or how do you, if you are white, benefit from white entitlement? If you have one of the top 2 answers, you get a copy of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus Climate Change. Go leave your response to the question from hell at the This Is Hell Facebook page. Jeremy and I were just talking about the movie Citizenfour. Not only is Kill the Messenger currently at the Landmark Cinema, theaters, whatever, at Diversity and Clark on Clark Street. But coming Friday is Citizenfour, which just opened in L.A., San Francisco, and New York City. To the best of my knowledge, it's only going to be showing at the Landmark Century Cinemas down in the, the old mall down there over on Clark and Diversity. So anyway, what I wanted to mention to you is that not only is Kill the Messenger playing there, but so they're going to show Citizenfour. And Kill the Messenger is the Gary Webb movie. Gary Webb, we interviewed on our show back in 1998 about the Dark Alliance and the way in which the CIA was funding the Contras through cocaine distribution and sales. And it's a very sad story. It's a very amazing story. And so you should go see Kill the Messenger now at Landmark Century Cinemas. But on Friday, when it opens up, you've got to go see Citizenfour. This is how the movie is described. In January 2013, filmmaker Laura Poitras, and I am really hoping that we can have her on our November 8th show as our first guest when we come back after our 1 week off. In January 2013, filmmaker Laura Poitras was in the process of constructing a film about abuses of national security in post 9/11 America when she started receiving encrypted emails from someone identifying himself as Citizenfour, who was ready to blow the whistle on the massive covert surveillance programs run by the NSA and other intelligence agencies. In June 2013, she and reporter Glenn Greenwald, a past guest on our show, flew to Hong Kong for the first of many meetings with the man who turned out to be Edward Snowden. She brought her camera with her. The film that resulted from the series of tense encounters is absolutely sui generis in the history of cinema, a 100% real-life thriller unfolding minute by minute before our eyes. Poitras is a masterful storyteller. She compresses the many days of questioning, waiting, confirming, watching the world's reaction, and agonizing over the next move into both a great character study of Edward Snowden and a narrative that will leave you on the edge of your seat as it inexorably moves towards its conclusion. And like I said, there is a spine-tingling conclusion. Apparently, there is yet another source. I was in Michigan, on my normal annual summer vacation, reading the Detroit Free Press and Detroit News. Big story there was how there was information leaked that on the watch list there were 96,000 people in the city of Dearborn, Michigan that were put on the watch list. I believe Dearborn has 120,000 people. Let's even say it has 200,000 people. 96,000 people from the same city, yet not one person from that city has ever been convicted of a terrorist act. So why would they be targeting Dearborn? Maybe it's because by the real offensive racists in the Detroit area, Dearborn is known as Dearbornistan because of the large amount of Iraqis, of Iranians, of Afghans, of Muslims who happen to live in Dearborn. So people were kind of concerned. Why are there 96,000 people on this watch list that just got leaked? And everybody was up in arms, and everybody was really upset in the Dearborn community. Front page of the Detroit Free Press and Detroit News. That's the news source, the spine-tingling conclusion of Citizenfour. The news source, and there's a really crazy scene I've heard. Really crazy scene that will make you get all tingly and goosebumpy. So you got to go check out that movie again. That's going to be opening at the Landmark Century Cinemas on Friday. That's Citizenfour. Right now is Kill the Messenger. Go see that. And don't forget to listen to our interview from 1998 with Gary Webb, which is up on SoundCloud. By the way, please share our show when we post it on Facebook. Posted at the This Is Hell page. If I posted the Chuck Mertz page, please share the podcasts of our show. We always truly appreciate it, and I thank all the people who shared this week. We had like a dozen, but I don't have the list in front of me. There is going to be a live event with Naomi Klein that I want to mention. Capitalism versus the Climate. Naomi Klein, journalist journalist and author, Puffin Foundation Writing Fellow at the Nation Institute. She will be speaking this Wednesday, October 29th, at the Drake Hotel, which is at 140 East Walton Place. Registration starts at 5:30, presentation and audience Q&A at 6, and adjournment and book signing at 7:15. So you can win the book during our question from hell if you have one of the top 2 responses by posting them at our Facebook page under the question from hell. And then you can take it to this event, which I think is $20. You can find out more by going to thechicagocouncil.org. Again, this is on Wednesday, October 29th at the Drake Hotel. Starts at 5:30. According to their press release here, it says, our economic system and our planetary system are now at war, according to Naomi Klein. What the climate needs to avoid collapse, she argues, is a contraction in humanity's uses of resources, but what our economic model demands to avoid collapse is unfettered expansion. Nevertheless, Klein suggests the climate crisis should not be viewed as grim penance, but rather as a kind of gift, a civilizational wake-up call, which has the potential to radically change society for the better. Is it possible for the free market to coexist with nature? What can we do to avert an environmental disaster? Join the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and Naomi Klein for an examination of our arguments on capitalism versus the climate. Again, find out more about this event by going to thechicagocouncil.org.
We know what you mean. We know what you've seen. We understand.
I'm very glad to hear that.
We know what you mean. We know what you've seen. We understand. We know what you mean. We know what you've seen. We understand.
It is the Radical Pessimist. Holy cow, the Radical Pessimist himself, Kevan Harris. Good morning, Kevan.
Hello.
What's new by you?
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You came of musical age in the 80s.
Sure.
70s, 80s.
Yeah, sure.
So you and your brother, you just made this Blind Boys of Alabama joke. Did you guys ever go see Jeff Healey in concert?
No.
I was wondering because maybe you guys would go together, the Blind Brothers, and then maybe he had like a blind groupie kind of section. You went over there.
I'm sorry, I'm choking on my coffee while you're saying this. No, we're too busy. There weren't a lot of us. We were too busy being Jose Feliciano heads, following him around country. And then we found out that at the end of the tour, because of our lack of vision, it was actually a Jose Iglesias tour.
Ah, Feliciatones.
Yes.
What a coincidence that Jeff Healey, blind guitarist, and also a very handsome man.
Yeah, isn't that weird? Just like myself.
That he would be successful as unlike yourself.
Like myself, exactly. So,
I saw this Dear White People last night.
Oh, did you? I really want to go see this.
Yeah, well, of course, in Princeton, it's like very apropos. So, if people who are listening who don't know, it's this movie that kind of was picked up out of the blue at, I think, Sundance.
Right.
And it's a first-time film director, and it's about, a group of black students at an elite American university, like an Ivy League type place. And it's a bunch of different characters, and they all kind of have different politics and different relationships, and it changes over time. But the whole issue, or the whole movie and plot revolves around this party that's thrown by a white, like fraternity club where they, people show up in blackface, and the invite that goes out. Obviously, it's based on a true story. And so it was interesting. I mean, it was cool, in a lot of ways. Like, I think the theater last night, probably there were about 100 people that showed up. About 70 of them were black students here at Princeton, and probably students at high schools. And it was just a great kind of environment to see because you could hear people, like the taboos that were being broken on the screen. I could hear all around me, like the titillating and things like that. I won't ruin it for the audience. It's more of a witty movie than like a hilarious kind of movie. So for people who like wit.
Yeah, don't spoil it for our audience because we all know that the lead actor ends up being his own mother at the end, which is weird. The one thing I saw about the movie is that one of the main characters in it has a radio show. It's called Dear White People. She starts off each show by saying, Dear White People, and apparently one of the lines is, Dear White People, you are officially racist if you don't have 2 black friends. So is it I thought that was a pretty good line. Is it that good of humor throughout the whole thing?
No. And I think that some was going around with the sound editing because it wasn't cut. I mean, in a way, it's like it just didn't seem like other films, and sometimes that was a good thing. Actually, usually it was a good thing. Sometimes it was a bad thing. Like the editing was kind of weird, the sound was weird, not like in a psychedelic way, like in an amateur way. I mean, they're all generally the acting is okay, but I mean, it hits. I mean, look, I mean, it depends where your setting is, but if it hits at a lot of the right notes. I'm not saying I like the movie because I agree with it. I liked it actually because it broke a lot of taboos, and I mean, I've never seen a movie like that before. And the fact that it came to a theater near me was pretty cool. I mean, the fact that Jeremy Scahill is going and singing light opera at dinner parties is also really excellent. You know.
Excuse me?
That's what I thought he was on the show to promote his light opera dinner party at Wilmette. He's doing scenes from the Mikado.
Hey, so you haven't seen Kill the Messenger or Citizen 4 yet, though, right?
No.
Just want to check on a couple of
I think I hear Citizen 4 is all shaky cam.
Really?
Laura Porter wore like a cell phone on her belt and just ran at Snowden. Just ran at him.
So essentially, it's that last scene in oh my God, what's the Jack Nicholson movie, The Shining? It's the last scene in The Shining throughout the whole thing, right? Where they're running through the maze.
Yeah, I was gonna. What's the scene where Jack Nicholson shows his ass? I was gonna go. Yeah, as good as it gets.
Yeah, yeah. That's how
more like
weird
that.
how I missed that movie. Hey, so you're on today to talk about what?
Yeah, well, there's a chance actually I'll be in Vienna for the final, or maybe not so final, round of talks on the nuclear question between Iran and the P5+1, the 5 members of the Security Council plus Germany. So if that happens, I'll try to do a call-in from there, from Vienna, because that might be hard, but we'll try it. But before that, I mean, since I may be there, I wanted to talk a bit about these negotiations. I mean, the interesting thing is that in the spring of this year, these negotiations were sort of headline news, and then the summer essentially, put forward a geopolitical crisis every week for the Obama administration. And now the talks themselves are off the headlines generally, and not necessarily such a bad thing. So I wanted to talk a bit about what are the stakes, what are the chances, and what happens if everything goes wrong.
Because I am betting, and I will make you a bet right now, that this is not the end of these talks in Vienna.
That's the general expert consensus now.
You're saying I'm an expert? Sweet.
So welcome to the club.
Sweet.
I don't know who your source is or who leaked to you, but a lot of people have been leaking. A lot of people have been leaking recently, and so that's a sign, first of all, that the talks weren't going as well as people had hoped. Basically, by the end of the summer, journalists were getting sidled up to by various diplomats on both sides, presenting their side of the story, saying it's the other side that's being intransigent. We're the ones that are giving up everything. So when both sides are saying that, you know that it's sort of, on the one hand, it's positioning between the two sides, between the Iranian side and sort of the American-European side. But also that since they're battling some things out in the public sphere, that, well, the negotiations aren't going as well as we had hoped. However, I never trust journalists who go to these junkets all the time. So the general consensus among them is that they're going to not cut off the talks. The talks, as people might know, were extended in the summer, extended to November 24th. Not coincidentally extended after the U.S. midterm elections. Get that whole thing done with. So the idea is that as soon as the elections happen here in the United States with its predictably disastrous results for Obama, then there'll be sort of this, let's not talk about politics after the party, and they'll get something done. That's what many of us still hope, that it is arguably other than to drop some bombs on some places in the Middle East, it's arguably the only foreign policy win that is left in the Obama administration. So that being the case, then many of us hope that he and the State Department will push something through, and then have to sort of twist the language of it to defend it in the American in the domestic scene. However, if that doesn't work out, then most people think that they will just extend the talks another year, or another time frame, 6 months, a year. And in that sense, that's better than just leaving the table. I don't think either side wants to do that. And there are a lot of people inside the United States, a lot of groups in the United States that want to scuttle the talks. A lot of hawks, both on the Democrat side and the Republican side, really want to scuttle this thing. They want to lock in Obama to make it so that he can't negotiate with the Iranians. They want to keep sanctions very high. I guarantee that the day after talks are extended, if they're extended, you're going to see a lot of noise on the right saying that we need to raise sanctions now because that'll put even more pressure on Iran, and if you do that, the Iranians may leave. So it's actually very, even though the talks have a good chance of being extended, there are actually a lot of things up in the air right now that could still provide some kind of spoiler which ends the talks, and we don't know what's going to happen after that.
I was thinking about the domestic politics when it comes to the Iran nuclear talks. How much does it benefit Republicans and Democrats to constantly have these talks open and never concluded?
That's a good question. I think I don't know. I don't think it. Well, look, I think it's anything but a deal for a particular number of groups. Anything but a deal. And one should ask the question, by the way, once the Hillary campaign gets even mildly up to steam, some journalists should be pressuring that campaign on what their position would be, because my sense is that this is the shelf life of this deal is the shelf life of the Obama administration. And if, not if, but when the Obama administration ends, whoever comes into power next, there's no incentive for them to take this deal if it's stuck in some kind of process, brush it off and say, I'm going to get this done, and make it a win for them because it's still associated with the Obama administration. So I think that to a certain extent there's an incentive for it to be dragged into the mud and dragged down while Obama is still president. And then if it fails, then of course it can all be blamed on him as well as the Iranians. He was naive. He didn't understand the Iranian mentality, all that kind of crap. So, there are actually a lot of players who, this is the problem with the extension of the talks. On the one hand, great, keep talking. Talk is better than war. On the other hand, as they go on, it increases the likelihood of different, groups to throw in spoilers. I don't mean this in a conspiratorial fashion. It's just front page news. So the Israelis, the sort of domestic Republican hawks, there's some of the Democratic hawks who don't like Obama and prefer that issue just go away, and then not to mention some of some of our allies in the Middle East who, we never know exactly what they want. So there's a lot of different balls in the air, and it's so the sooner something gets accomplished, the sooner that things get locked in between the two sides and both agree to do things, the better. And they actually have agreed to do a lot, by the way. What people don't know, I think generally, is that 95% of this deal has been agreed upon already. The United States and Europe have agreed upon a bunch of sanctions relief. Not a lot of it, but certainly some, especially some of it that can be done away with the stroke of a pen. And the Iranians have agreed to all kinds of concessions on monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. So there's 5% left they're actually dealing with. And there's a lot in that 5%, but they've actually accomplished a lot. And the fact that they've been talking to each other, this wasn't the case 2 years ago, that if the Americans wanted to know what the Iranians thought about a particular issue 5 years ago, well, they just have to guess. They didn't even know who to ask. Sometimes they'd even ask the wrong person because they didn't like, for example, Ahmadinejad. But now that's not the problem. They can talk to each other. They have sort of very easy contact, and that alone is a major accomplishment, and it's probably not going to go back to status quo ante.
So let's say that there are some sort of talks or some sort of agreement, I should say, some sort of agreement is made and sanctions are somewhat lifted and Iran opens up their nuclear program so everybody can observe everything that they're doing. Is that let's say Obama was able to do that, is that a political winner for whoever the Democratic Party candidate is for president when it comes to debate time?
In 2016, well, yeah, it's gonna have to play out on the sort of, as they say in D.C., the optics of the deal. Yeah, sorry. So this thing. I mean, look, I'm not a nuclear scientist. We have a couple here at Princeton I've spoken to who work actually on these kind of issues, on non-proliferation. And I've said this before on the show, but every side of this debate can find their own nuclear scientists to say whatever they want already about how dangerous or how not dangerous the Iranian nuclear program is. Okay, so it's not a matter of science; it's a matter of politics and of framing. And so whatever comes, let's say they get a deal in November or maybe say in March or something like that. Then how that would play out in American politics would be, one, what else is going on in the Middle East at the time in terms of how to frame this deal in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But also how smooth will the transition be to the next Democratic candidate? In that sense, by the way, although I and a lot of people would love to have some kind of opposition to a Clinton candidacy, a smooth Democratic transition, a seamless power transferal between the Obama administration and whoever is supposed to be or desired to be coming in next, actually might make it easier to sell the deal to Democrats because you don't want to rock the internal boat. Toe the party line. They're all being very Leninist about this. So, but right now, as far as I can tell, inside the Democratic Party, it's a mess. They don't even know, they don't know what they're doing. If they lose the Senate in November, then it's going to be recrimination time, classic Democratic Party stuff when they just, all backbite. They start leaking the merts, this kind of stuff. So that would be a bad situation for the Iran deal, I think, because you would get people, of course, staking claims vis-a-vis deal or no deal. But by 2 seconds, we have a short-term memory in the United States. So if there's a strong, well-funded Dem on the ballot, then they can take credit. Especially if we got two hawks running. If you got two hawks running, then on the other hand, the Dems always got to out-hawk the right. I don't know. Good question.
I know, because I was going to say, don't you think that when this does, I think that when there's going to be a foreign policy debate, either between Republican candidates, Democratic candidates, or between the person that each party selects, I think that when this becomes a campaign issue in a debate, all it's going to be is people trying to out-hawk each other. I don't think that there's going to be anybody who's going to be arguing for a less hawkish stance because they'll believe that the hawkish stance against Iran is what gets votes.
Yeah, fair enough. And you never lose any political capital by being hawkish on Iran in Washington. So yeah, I mean, my gut says you're right. I have a hope that by that time the politics will be more balanced. You don't see this Iran deal in the news every day. And
right.
That's a good thing. You see a lot of the stuff in the news. So hopefully domestic crises and your usual flash in the pan kind of news cycle stuff will dominate and won't let the Iran issue come to the fore of where, then technics be damned.
So Obama's hasn't had much success with Iran talks. Will there be any more or less success under Hillary?
Well, I just don't think there won't be these type of talks under a Hillary administration. Because this whole thing was coming out of the Obama administration's, 2008 election. This whole thing is part of the 2008. Maybe it's the only thing that we accomplished by voting for the guy. Because that started a process inside the State Department to bring in people who weren't just immediately opposed to dealing with Iran. And many of those people left, by the way. I mean, many of those people left right away, and other people stayed. However, once it became, Obama doesn't care about foreign policy. Okay, that's what basically we know that. He cares about domestic politics. This was useful domestically when he was elected, and it was carried out for a while. And now I think, again, he's associated with it. So if he pulls it off, it's going to be considered domestically a victory for him. I don't think any other people have a stake in it. If you get like a Kissingerian-style aide to a Hillary administration who understands that the point of bringing Iran into the, sort of balance of power, normalizing Iran in the balance of power of the Middle East, is not to legitimize or reward revolutionary Iran or all the bad things that Iran has either done or has supposedly done in the past. But the point of doing this is for the future, that you have to create, you have to create a balance of power in the region, as obnoxious or noxious as it is. But that is the sort of beginning of moving in a different direction where you don't have states collapsing left and right, and you don't have essentially borders disappearing, okay? So, basic Machiavellian Kissinger will understand, Kissinger-style guy or girl, not Samantha Power, not those people. They don't know. They don't see these ways. But Kissinger did, and actually, who was just here a couple weeks ago at Princeton was James Baker. James Baker was the last Kissingerian. He gave a talk. It was about Iran a bit, but mostly just about sort of Middle East. And this is a guy who, someone asked him a question about the Saudis. We've been friends with the Saudis for all this time, and the Saudis are so bad. And he was like, look, he's like they've been stable allies. What are you going to say? And there's a reason why Baker was called Bush's consigliere, because Baker, the moral question is not important. It's about balance of power and managing that. There's never going to be a solution to the problem. You just have to manage it in terms of who's balancing who, so that America can get its way. Okay, so that a real sort of foreign policy mind in the White House, which we don't have right now, would hopefully make the case that Iran should be brought in for that reason. Because if you don't, then all of the so-called, collective solutions that the United States is supposedly, fostering, promoting, paying for in the Middle East, whether it's, I don't even know who's left for us to pay to do that. But let's say that we have a group of states in the Middle East who are trying to collectively solve problems, hypothetically. Well, the one more state in that region can always veto that unless they have a stake in it. So they have to be bought in, and they have to be bought in so that it's in their incentive not to leave the table. And I mean on all these different issues, okay? So Iran, you ask most people in D.C., even on the right, and they'll admit that. They'll admit that, and in their mind that means that Iran has to disappear. But Iran's not going anywhere. And we've tried for 35 years in various ways, hoping, moping, or paying, thinking that the Islamic Republic is going to collapse. And it doesn't. It doesn't collapse. So that, I think if some people have finally accepted that, certainly people next to Obama have accepted that, then the question is, okay, now what? And then we have to think about what kind of power balance in the Middle East is something that, for me personally, it doesn't matter, but, for the White House, what would be, beneficial for politics here. And so if they have that in the back of their mind, then something like a, continuation of the talks would be in their interest. But, I'm speaking, this is 3 steps ahead, and that's not the way things work in Washington.
So ISIS is making the Revolutionary Guard look like a whole bunch of pikers. So
your Revolutionary Guard's reputation has been rehabilitated thanks to ISIS. This is one of the, ironies. The Revolutionary Guard, which is a sort of, it's a part of the Iranian military that has high prestige. They're kind of more secretive. They come out of the revolution themselves, and they have a sort of foreign special ops arm, and they've been, training and sending weapons to Iraqis, to Syrians, and others. They were the least popular group in Iran, I would say. 2009, they were blamed for all of the protests. They're blamed for everything. The United States media writes about them like they control the world, like they're like coming over the Rio Grande
Right.
next month with Ebola in a Pringles can,
Mm-hmm.
and don't lick your lips. Come on. and now all of a sudden, they're saving the Kurds in northern Iraq. They're consulting with the Iraqi government openly. One of the old Kurdish elites, Barzani, said that the Iranians were the ones who helped us, fight off ISIS. So actually, in a very weird turn of events, as usual, they have been rehabilitated to a certain extent, even in the eyes of Iranians. It's kind of weird. When ISIS was getting all this media hype in late summer, and they were just on this sort of Sherman's march through Iraq, Iranian sort of media sphere and blogosphere was lighting up, saying, "Oh my God, what if they get here? Oh my God, what are they going to do?" And then you saw all of a sudden the Revolutionary Guard were saying, "There's no way they're going to make it to the border." There's sort of all these classic sort of braggadocio you see from any military people. And the Iranians were like, "Oh well, these guys, the Revolutionary Guard are so bad, they're good. They'll save us." And it was weird. So this point. I mean, I guess the broader point is that when you have states collapsing, and you just have sort of population transfers, you don't even have stable political order. Okay, then people get less and less concerned with issues of freedom and democracy, and economic growth and women's rights, etc. So stable state order. Now I sound like a Kissingerian now too, but look, this is the case. You need states to do anything, even to do bad things, but you need states. So stable political order, which is deteriorating in the region, is the goal. And so in that sense, you have all kinds of people on different sides of lots of different political questions to still agree on that. And I don't know. I mean, that seems to be a place to start for lots of different people, no matter their politics. I mean, I think the far right and the far left here are the people who I just don't agree with. And the far left would say something like I read on Counterpunch a couple of days ago, that the reason that Iran is at the table with the U.S. is because Iran is not a revolutionary state. It wants to participate in U.S. imperialism. It wants to participate in the U.S. control of the Middle East. And, well, on the one hand, yes. Iran would love to be part of, a sort of normal Middle East order in which it gains benefits just like Saudi does, just like Jordan does, just like Egypt does. So, yeah, point taken. On the other hand, other than the fact that basically the U.S. is doing all this to help, secure supplies of natural resources and oil, I mean, the U.S. is not in control of anything. The U.S. is what imperial project is going on here? Of course, all kinds of people at home are now spitting their coffee out. But I just, this is not what was part of the plan last time I checked. So there's actually a broad sort of old school kind of consensus here that state building is the key, and you could get, I mean, not this crop of politicians, but if you got a few people in the White House who understood that, you could craft an argument about that. If you knew how to ward off the hawks. I mean, the crazy hawks.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, Kevin. Kevin Harris, the radical pessimist, comes on our show every 3 or 4 months to tell us about what's going on in the world around us, in particular what's going on in Iran. I'm looking forward to hearing your report from Vienna, Austria, I would assume, not Vienna, West Virginia. That's where you'll be giving your talk from, I hope. And so, Kevin, I will be speaking with you in the very near future.
Okay, my man.
All right, you stay beautiful.
Blap.
This is Hell every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. Write this down right now. 773-828-9682. 773-828-9682. That's our special This Is Hell hotline. 773 You by OVA. It was the only phone number that was available, and some egg fertilization company had it before. It's the only one. It was a mistake on our part. But write that number down. The reason I want you to write that number down is the third person to text us at that number will get 2 free passes to Red Moon's Skelebration. This fall, Red Moon's family event Skelebration, which debuted with great success last year, returns for its second annual installment of experimental exploration. Families are invited into its otherworldly playground inside its Pilsen home at 2120 South Jefferson Street for a reinvention of the seasonal rituals of Halloween. Creativity, imagination, and a sense of adventure are celebrated with interactive experiences, immersive encounters, creative snacks, and imaginative music. This year directed by Casey Foster under conceptual direction by Red Moon, producing artistic director Frank McGarry. It happens this Saturday and Sunday are the last 2 days of Skelebration 2014. Promises an all-new array of multi-sensory delights. Red Moon's Celestial Swing, the UFO Carousel, Red Moon's Spectacle Hall features a massive series of interactive possibilities. Red Moon's Cartoon Adventure. Families can picnic in the man-made lagoon. The premiere of Red Moon's newest food service device, the Pastry Wheel. All of that happening at Red Moon's Skelebration. The third person to text us at 773-828-9682. 773-828-9682 will win a pair of passes to go to Skelebration 2014, put on by the great folks over at Red Moon Theater. The U.S. is a melting pot of races and ethnicities that have all contributed to our nation's creation. But Indigenous Americans' contribution wasn't a contribution at all, but something white supremacists stole from them. Here to tell us the real history of the United States, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, author of the recently released An Indigenous People's History of the United States. Good morning, Roxanne.
Good morning.
This is an amazing book, and anybody who has bought any of the People's History books, whether it's from the first one from the late, great Howard Zinn, who is on our show several times, one of my very, very favorite guests, and I miss him greatly. The People's History, if you have some of the People's History books, maybe the ones by Ray Raphael, you got to add this to your collection. This might be the most important one. This might be the most important book about American history, I think, since the People's History of the United States. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz is not only the author of the book, she is Professor Emerita of Ethnic Studies at California State University in Hayward. Roxanne's most recent book is 2005's Blood on the Border, Memoir of the Contra War. Roxanne traveled to the front lines of the Contra War in Honduras and Nicaragua over 100 times in the 1980s. So I got to ask you about something that's completely unrelated to your Indigenous People's History of the United States. Real quick, I was just curious because you did write Blood on the Border, Memoir of the Culture War, and you were in Honduras, in the area that Contras controlled in the 1980s, hundreds of times. Do you have any, we had Gary Webb on our show back in 1998. We had the great fortune of interviewing him for about 45 minutes. It's one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done. It wasn't, my part was horrible. He was fantastic. Do you have any thoughts on Kill the Messenger, on the story of Gary Webb, just being somebody who had this experience with the Contras?
Well, I went to the first showing of the film that just came out and a week ago yesterday. And it made me so sad because when his series came out in the San Jose Mercury News, it felt like such a vindication for everything I had seen with my own eyes there on the airstrip at the Honduran airport, where and also out at Rus Rus, the Contra base, where they're loading up, to go back on both U.S. Air Force planes and as well as their contract, what we call the CIA plane, Setco, a Honduran private airline run by the drug pen of Honduras, who they later kidnapped and arrested. He's still in prison. And I don't know, I can't believe how they destroyed this man, but I can because I felt I was almost destroyed by the experience. I try to tell the story in the book. I wrote it as a memoir simply because I couldn't write it objectively because I was a character in it. I was attacked so viciously in every way. I actually feared for my life just simply telling the truth. And also, I got an insight into the U.S. mainstream media, and really even the alternative media to some extent. I would be there seeing these things, and I would look over and I would see Julia Preston from the New York Times or Stephen Kinzer, these big-time reporters, and never would their articles report this. Only Gary Webb did. And he was young. He was too young in the 80s to probably pay much attention even. He went in as a blank slate just to tell the truth. And this is what happened to him. He had no idea what he was getting into. As I watched that movie, of course, I had read the book, Kill the Messenger, which is very, very good, and also Gary Webb's own story, Dark Alliance. But when I was watching the movie, it was almost like PTSD, watching it over and seeing what happened to him. It just it really broke me up. But I think we should consider him one of our great heroes and martyrs.
Yeah, definitely. He was a really great man. There is kind of a connection between those days of Iran-Contra and your book, again, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, and that is that the indigenous people's history here in the United States is something that is dismissed or ignored or made to be just another one of the Americans who have contributed to this country. On the same hand, the Iran-Contra is something that is dismissed by our media. We'll get to your book in just one second, but just one more question on that. What do we miss in our understanding of our world today when we dismiss what really happened with the Iran-Contra scandal as nothing more than a political scandal that was partisan?
Yes, and that no one is in prison for untold deaths of civilians and assassinations of people just doing community organizing, and most recently a coup in Honduras. It's not over. The point I make in the indigenous people's history of the United States is these are not things that happened in the past. They happen. Let's go on. They're connected with everything that happens now and keeps happening. So for me, my involvement in Central America, I felt very committed because the Reagan administration, we had just really gotten started with the American Indian movement, having founded the International Indian Treaty Council in 1974, of going to the United Nations, building this international indigenous movement that, is now 40 years since we started doing that. And it's amazing what we've been able to do. But it was just in its birth pangs in the early 80s when the Reagan administration came to power. And they immediately started, as they had promised they would do, intervening to overthrow the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. They weren't about to have a liberation movement, as they put it, in their backyard. So they actually started with targeting a group of native people there, the Mosquito Indians, and then trying to discredit the Sandinistas here. As we had raised consciousness about indigenous peoples, they claimed that Jeane Kirkpatrick, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, claimed that the Sandinistas had committed genocide against 250,000 Mosquito Indians. And there are only 50,000 Mosquito Indians, but they could make up anything they wanted, because people didn't know anything here, and there were so few voices. So it's actually a part of the story, not something separate, how they wantonly used the indigenous peoples movement as a way of discrediting a progressive government. And it confused people. It really did reduce the support. You could just measure it and feel it. the solidarity and support for the Sandinistas and the opposition to the United States. Everyone turned to Salvador, Guatemala, and so it was, they actually did, electorally finally defeat the Sandinistas.
That's incredibly. I'm glad that I asked you about it because of the movie that's coming out and the way that we dismiss that part of history. And I knew that there was going to be a tie-in to your Indigenous Peoples History book, and the fact that the U.S. was here again targeting Indigenous people in the Americas is really nauseating. Earlier on the show, we were speaking with Jeremy Scahill, and in your book, you talk about the militarized U.S. foreign policy, the way that the United States leans on military solutions for all of their problems around the world. Jeremy Scahill has written extensively on America's dirty wars, these assassination hit squads that are sent around the world to kill people who we believe might be a threat to the United States' national security. Are the dirty wars that are going on that Jeremy Scahill reports about, are those due to or because of the history that America has with the indigenous peoples on this land?
Absolutely. The whole behavior of the United States in the world is based on its formation. I think it's odd sometimes that this lack of curiosity in, even thinking people in the United States who just cross their mind, how did the United States become the most powerful military in human history, more powerful than all other militaries put together in human history, and dominate the world and terrorize the world? And, it's almost as if there's this assumption of manifest destiny, that it literally just somehow happened. It was some kind of natural occurrence. And it wasn't, it was, they militarily fought inch by inch, every inch of territory in North America that the U.S. controls. They won by genocidal wars. This can't but affect, and this was over a period of 100 years of the Republic, preceded by 200 years of settler colonialism, where the settlers carried out these mercenary attacks. They were rangers, and they were there was little oversight from Great Britain, and anyway, that's how settler colonialism works. You let the settlers just do what they wish, and then the military comes in and supports them when things get rough, where they round up the indigenous people and remove them, relocate them. Under the British, they only got as far as the 13 colonies, and they were supposed to stay just 13 colonies. That's how the United States should be today. Had Britain succeeded in say like Canada, if we'd been like Canada, because in 1754, the proclamation, the British proclamation, forbade settlers to go over the mountain range, Alleghenies and the Appalachian, and those who had gone illegally and were squatting on native farmers' lands in the Ohio Valley were ordered to come back, and soldiers were actually sent in to force them to come back. And this was a part of the Treaty of Paris with the solution to the 7-Year War with France and Britain, that this would remain Indian country, where trading relationships would go on with the native nations, but there would not be colonization ventures or settlers there. And that is why the United States oligarchy decided to become independent, because they already had in mind an expansion, particularly of slave plantation economy. And that is the main reason, and it's never given as the main reason for actually leaving the British Empire. So it's all prettied up. So from the very founding, the United States was a settler colonial power that had its own aspirations for empire. And in fact, they made no bones about it. Thomas Jefferson called it an empire for liberty. So, we just kind of gloss over these things and don't make any connections like this. And you can only do that by a second genocide, and that is a historical genocide, erasing Native Americans from history, that they were very few, they died off by diseases, all of these sort of passive, it's so tragic, even an admission of genocide now, but not to follow up with the survival aspect. Other people who have been victims of genocide, the Jewish people or the Armenians or Cambodians, they're still there. No one says they're gone. They've disappeared or they're irrelevant now. But where Native Americans, it's a terminal narrative. And so even that newer, it's fairly new, even an admission of genocide, which of course isn't official, but among progressives, this is rhetoric that's accepted now of genocide, and even that is turned into a way of further erasing Native people, rather than regressing the harm and looking at the whole structure of the United States as a military power. It's just amazing how they've convinced the whole world of this. It's not just people in the United States who are hoodwinked. There's still this sense that what the United States is doing now, or what they did in Korea, or what they did in Vietnam, or what they did in Nicaragua, is somehow an anomaly. It's not the true American values. It's something they're getting off the track, and it's not. It's perfectly on the track. What we have to do is get them off the track.
Right. The way that we're taught history in general, K through 12, is an abomination. But anyway, the way that we're taught history from kindergarten to 12th grade is that the American Revolution was an anti-imperialist revolution. The way that you see it is it might have been an anti-imperialist fight against the empire that was there, but it was a pro-imperial thing because they wanted to be the replacement for that empire, a more intense empire within the country. Is the worst thing that happened then to the indigenous peoples in the United States not colonization, but the U.S. victory in the Revolutionary War?
Well, that was certainly, and Native people knew it at the time because they fought on the side of the British.
Right.
We stayed neutral. Only two factions, the Senecas of the Iroquois Confederation and one faction of the Cherokees were really forced to fight on the side of the Americans or die, have their villages burned. But others who were threatened did not do that. So just the fact that they fought on the other side, they knew what their interests were, that not that they loved Britain, but the faraway oppressor is preferable to the bloodthirsty, homicidal settlers who simply wanted to kill and eradicate the Native people. So, of course, that was the greatest setback. That's why, for me, every July 4th is a day of mourning. It's the saddest day of the year, and it's so offensive that it's celebrated as something glorious. And it. I know it's hard for people to, I was raised the same way as everyone else, with patriotism. And when I was in the 8th grade, I was in a speech class and actually went to the finals, in Oklahoma with my speech. America is great because America is good. So it's not like I had, a different kind of childhood or insights, but it's not easy to give up and say, well, this makes it hard to organize people because they need, they have this attachment. But that's a catch-22. We can never get anywhere with our organizing. We should have, in terms of the stage of capitalism and the labor movement in the U.S., we should have had a thoroughgoing revolution, first of all, in the early 20th century, with the Socialist Party and all the unions then. And then we had the second chance in the 30s. And have to ask why. Why now is there almost no possibility? And that's because people have run out of ideas within the framework in which we figure out how to change this society. Really, there are no ideas other than just testimony, get up and protest, because it's but not really expecting to have results. So I don't know, what it will take. I'm hoping this book, so far it's been received as liberating knowledge rather than oppressive or depressing, in the sense that the picture it paints of the United States as a military power, because I think people know the truth kind of in their, in their subconscious, and there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of violence that plays out because of the so-called frontier violence. All the arguments about we had 3 yesterday of crazed shooters. One was a Native American who shot his schoolmates in Marysville, Washington, and these, this. Now and then something like this happens in other countries, but in many other countries, people have many more guns than they do in the United States per person. But it really, we have to ask why we have the highest rate of homicide, violence, prison population. There's something, deeper than sociological explanations.
There's something very violent in our history that we're not willing to confront. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz is our guest. She is the author of the recently released An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States. She is Professor Emerita of Ethnic Studies at California State University, Hayward. Roxanne's most recent book before this is 2005's Blood on the Border, a memoir of the Contra War. Roxanne traveled to the front lines of the Contra War in Honduras and Nicaragua over 100 times in the 1980s. And if you have seen the movie Kill the Messenger, if you have read the book Dark Alliance, if you've heard our interview from 1998 with Gary Webb, this is a fantastic book to check out so you can understand what was going on with the Contra War. Again, Blood on the Border, a memoir of the Contra War. But her new book that we're discussing today, An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, I think that one of the reasons that people do not want to discuss the, like you call it, genocidal, settler colonialization of this country that nearly wiped out Native Americans is because if Americans look at that history, we will feel bad. We will feel guilty. We will feel somehow responsible for that, as if it is our fault. Then there will be this moment where people are saying, hey, this isn't my fault. A friend of mine used to say, look, my family didn't come here until 1900. I have nothing to do with slavery. I have nothing to do with the indigenous people who were here beforehand. How much of a challenge is it for you to have people confront what they know is a real history, but it makes the United States look bad?
Yeah, one Canadian Native scholar has called that the rush to innocence.
Right.
Denial. And what they're doing in Canada is really exemplary. We need to really look at their how the immigrants are organizing themselves. This organization, No One is Illegal. They have, because of the Canadian Native people's struggles since Oka in 1990, that uprising of the Mohawks, and then repeated again not so long ago, and the blockades going on. Here in the United States, we haven't had, they pretty well crushed the core of the, front of organizing the American Indian movement. So since Wounded Knee, we haven't had the kind of thing that people could mobilize around, and so a whole generation or more has, no sense of how they can do solidarity with Native people. So in Canada, they do have that sense, and they've been able to carry it on and build it. And in their immigrant organizing, they offer to new immigrants and old immigrants, in organizing. You can either be, as an immigrant, you can either be a settler, or you can be in solidarity with the indigenous peoples. If you choose to be a settler, you are an oppressor, and you are assuming Canadian history of genocide. So I think we need to do that here, too. You do assume it automatically. That is the automatic thing that will happen to you. You become a settler, and then you are responsible because you're living in the society and enjoying the benefits of what was stolen from Native people, from the labor of enslaved Africans, and you are assuming. But it's kind of absurd because none of us who were born since then, even if our families were the biggest slave owners around, we're still not responsible for what they did. We're responsible for now, the situation now. But we have to understand where that has come from. So I tried to alleviate the guilt is a very, very negative emotion for constructive thinking or work or anything. But that's what people have. They have it subconsciously because they haven't brought to the surface and looked at and seen, their relationship to it. They're not responsible for what happened historically. They really are not. They're responsible for what happens now and the redress for Native people. So that is our present generation's responsibility, no matter who they are, or what their past was. I really started looking at it. Of course, I got involved in, I grew up very poor and rural. My dad was a sharecropper, my mother part Indian, and very not, wanting to identify with Indian. She married a white sharecropper as a way of getting out of that identity. So we grew up in a white farming community. It was absolute apartheid in Oklahoma when I grew up. There were Indian rural towns, there were black rural towns, and there were white rural towns. And they were all mixed up together within 10 miles of each other, but never the twain shall meet, It was pretty strictly enforced apartheid. And of course, there's sundown. All these were sundown towns. No black person or Indian could come into a white town after sundown. So this oppressive if you could get out of being an Indian or black, you certainly would take that opportunity simply because it was deadly and dangerous to be so. So that I see the tragedy of my mother. But my father was from Scots-Irish settler. They're the ones who marched across the frontier, gaining land from Indians, because kind of what I call the foot soldiers of empire, and then losing it because they never had the capital. They were not capitalists. It's not that they didn't desire. They desired land. They desired slaves. That's what they were going for, but they were losers. They kept losing, and moving westward. And sort of Daniel Boone was their hero, and he died in Missouri, and started in Kentucky. So everyone claims relationship, a blood relation with Daniel Boone. So I say they all ended up without anything in Oklahoma and did the run, to grab land, but
Right.
They lost it there too. So my grandfather had land, but then my dad was a sharecropper. So this has to be understood too, the class system, and I think for working class and poor whites, to understand this is because now there's a resentment, they scapegoat Indians or blacks or immigrants or whoever else for their failure, because failing as a white man in a white supremacist society makes you a loser. And so I think that's a lot of the work I I've been doing. I was involved in the American Indian movement, but then in the early 90s, I started exploring this settler side and the class nature of colonialism among the settlers and in my own family. So I did a book called Red Dirt, Growing Up Okie, which is, tells that story. So I think in this book, The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, I bring to it this insight of the settler, my father's family, and then the tragedy and horror of the experience of the natives, where someone like my mother ends up an orphan. Her mother was an orphan. Lost people, refugees, people starving in horrible, desperate situations like we would see anywhere where constant warfare is going on, and generational trauma, being taken out of their homes, the children, and forcibly sent to boarding schools for 10 years, not even seeing their families, unlearning their languages and practices. So there's a lot of trauma in the Native community. There's a lot of dysfunction because of that. And people look at that and they say poverty. Well, not necessarily. Poverty isn't the root of it, because you can improve the conditions of, certain people. They still carry the trauma and the effects of colonialism. We know that from Africa, from Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon was a psychoanalyst and a graduate of Sorbonne. He was a colonial subject, so of France, of Martinique, and he wrote from the heart. He wasn't writing about other people. He was writing about himself, and the colonial violence and how resistance is the only way to. Once we see resistance really active, like Wounded Knee, suddenly those dysfunctions that people are so rife in the community, they kind of resolve themselves because there's a focus of liberation, but it's very, very hard to maintain that, and it's going to take a huge mass movement of in solidarity, but for their own liberation, the general public, and especially the young people. And I think they've achieved that in Canada. I think they're achieving that in parts of Latin America, but it's very backward here in the U.S., and that's why I decided to focus on the United States, because of its power in the world and its power domestically as an entity. Of course, it's much harder, to mass a consistent movement here that really looks at the history and can't get by with what other people can. Canadians can sort of blame the United States. Well, we're just adjuncts to the United States, kind of having to act like them and not take responsibility for U.S. imperialism. But, that is fully on our shoulders in the United States.
Right.
We're killing people all over the world, what Jeremy Scahill was talking about.
So I'm glad you made the point about poverty, about how the issue for Indigenous Americans isn't just poverty, because my sister-in-law, she worked on reservations, Chippewa Reservation in central Michigan around Mount Pleasant, and she said when the casinos came in, yes, everybody started getting more money, and they all started getting a check from the casinos, but she was like, psychologically, socially, culturally, nothing changed. They just had money. The depression was still there. All of the problems that they had beforehand were still there. They just had money. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And there's another issue that you bring up that makes the Indigenous peoples' challenge here in this country, or the way that they're described, or the way what their challenges are, a little bit different. Poverty is not the only issue when it comes to Indigenous Americans, as you were saying. And you write how in your book you, quote, wanted to set aside the rhetoric of race race, not because race and racism are unimportant, but to emphasize that native peoples were colonized and deposed of their territories as distinct peoples, hundreds of nations, not as a racial or ethnic group. Colonization, dispossession, settler, colonialism, genocide, these are the terms that drill to the core of U.S. history, to the very source of the country's existence. So why is that so important? What's the difference between the devastation of the indigenous peoples being caused by racism or not?
Well, race, of course, is very racist. Settler colonialism, white supremacy, probably is no worse than any other colonial setting, and the British and the French and the Belgians in Africa, the Dutch in Indonesia, the Spanish in Latin America, and all of them in the Caribbean. But the way it gets institutionalized in the United States, the way the economy of the United States, even now, its original source of capitalist development was appropriation, that is theft of the land, and the ownership of human bodies of African slaves. So you have, it's not just a labor system, as it's often portrayed. It's also, an ownership of bodies, so that slaves, human bodies, are commodities like cattle or sheep or cotton bought and sold on the market. So these peculiarities, such a highly developed system, developed more than any other place in the colonized world. This is, and of course it continues without a beat after independence and grows exponentially, mainly by the Jackson administration's expelling of all those agricultural nations from the southeast, where plantation slavery had taken hold in Virginia and Georgia, Maryland. And with that eradication, which was completed by 1840, once Alabama, Mississippi, the Mississippi Valley was cleared, then the Cotton Kingdom was born. It gave a whole new lease on life for slavery it was the engine of the United States economy. It was the single commodity of cotton sold on the world market that built, what came to be the Industrial Revolution, the railroads, the everything. So this institutionalization of white supremacy with slavery could not help but spill over into, because it's so clearly based on skin color. In Britain, when the colonialism first arose, when modern colonialism first arose, in Britain, when they invaded and colonized Ireland, and still have a colony there in Northern Ireland today, they portrayed the Irish as inferior, as descended from apes, and that they were the same as Africans, even though they were blue-eyed blondes. So, but this changed in the United States to definitely a skin color defining race. So that couldn't help but affect how Native people are treated. But it's not the source of why they were. They didn't want their bodies to sell. They wanted to eliminate them so that they could have the land. So it's a very different. It was the elimination of whole peoples, of collectivities, and not of individuals. Now, African Americans in their struggles and resistance and have formed themselves as a collective, as a people, through struggle. So there's a strong identity, a strong culture, but there's no land base. And for Native Americans, it's a collectivity. I mean, other peoples too, immigrants and all that. It's not that, people do form themselves into collective entities and have rights as collective entities. That's how we, what is defined by affirmative action. But for Native Americans, the difference is, and what's hard to deal with when you're just dealing with race, is that the land issue, because Native people still have roots in the land and have land claims they're fighting for, and and treaty rights. So this is very hard, I think, for any movement. In fact, no movement has ever fully embraced this as a cause in the United States. Never happened. There's been kind of rhetorical support, but not truly seeing it as a key to the future, if there is to be one, of the United States and the world.
You write that to say that the United States is a colonist settler state is not to make an accusation, but rather to face historical reality, without which consideration not much in U.S. history makes sense unless indigenous people are erased. Why doesn't U.S. history make sense without considering indigenous culture?
Well, because first of all, we can't understand how the United States went from 13 little colonies hugging the Atlantic Ocean and only a small portion of that coast, from Massachusetts to Carolinas. We can't understand how it went from that to the whole continent and then the world, but especially the whole continent, without, by any kind of explanation, without reducing or ignoring the resistance of Native Americans, because in Native Americans resisting brought this huge amount of violence, and this is how colonial violence works. It is a vicious, deadly violence to destroy. So how the United States, I trace in the book how the United States Army was formed as a based on counterinsurgency, because until the you could say the invasion of Mexico in 1846, which is also very rarely talked about. But even in the invasion of Mexico through Veracruz and into Mexico City and holding Mexico City, the United States employed its counterinsurgency tactics. That's the only thing the Army knew, because they were only fighting Native people, and so they were fighting liberation movements, resistance movements. So counterinsurgency is the method to do that. You kill civilians, you burn their crops, you destroy their food supplies, you hold hostage their children and families so that whoever's fighting will surrender. So that's counterinsurgency. And they played that out in every war. With World War I and World War II are the anomalies. They're the exceptions to the development of the U.S. Army. And we saw that Army after World War II not miss a beat and revert to counterinsurgency in Korea and in Vietnam. And now, and with much fanfare, reviving counterinsurgency, republishing the manual. But most armies in the world are not organized around counterinsurgency. And the U.S. is, and that's why it's so deadly, and that's why it's so, there's this kind of drive what Richard Slotkin calls the regeneration through violence, that it is the definition of United States identity and nationalism, is this violence and overcoming and destroying other people. So it gets repeated as almost a political tool for advancing careers. You know, it certainly was for Andrew Jackson, a career maker, and it still is. You know, Obama had to do his thing. They all do. Clinton comes in, he's going to, you know, not carry on. Like, what does he do? He spends his entire time in office doing counterinsurgency in Iraq, you know, and in the Philippines and in Colombia. So, you know, they're all over the world acting on counterinsurgency. So this is the center of what the United States is in the world, and it cannot be understood without understanding in some detail. Unfortunately, there's a very, very good book that came out while I was writing this book by a military historian named John Grenier, Grenier, and it's called The American Way of War, and it looks from 1620 to 1814 of when he sees that U.S. Army being formed that still exists today and how it behaves in the world. And this man is the thing is that military people know this. They sing praises to it. They identify with the Indian Wars as great triumphs. They list them in their annals as wars, not massacres. Wounded Knee is not a massacre, it's a battle. And it's in the list of battles won by the U.S. Army, the 7th Cavalry. It was just a massacre of civilians. So it's, you know, that is the most important central thing, that if we don't understand that, because that is the role we play in the world and the harm that continues to be done. So to raise, you know, the consciousness of this, one has to understand how the United States came to be as it is. And it's, like I wrote, it's not an accusation. It's an absolutely essential consciousness and fact that we have to confront in order to figure out how to dismantle it.
Roxanne, this book is fascinating. As like I was saying at the beginning of the interview, anybody who has read any of the people's histories, and even if you haven't read any of them, you should definitely go out and add this to your collection, or just read it if you haven't read any of the other people's histories. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, author of the recently released An Indigenous People's History of the United States. She is also author of the 2005 book Blood on the Border, Memoir of the Contra War. If you've seen Kill the Messenger, this will be a great complementary book to the knowledge that you will have gained from that, or reading Dark Alliance. But again, the book that you should be checking out today, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, author of An Indigenous People's History of the United States. One last question for you, Roxanne, and it's what we call the question from hell. The question we hate to ask, you might hate to answer, or our audience is going to hate the response. You write about our culture, our ruthless dog-eat-dog competition for possible success, even though it rarely results, and high rates of suicide, drug abuse, alcoholism, sexual violence in the U.S. against women and children, homelessness, dropping out of school, and gun violence. These are symptoms, and there are many more, of a deeply troubled society, and they are not new. How much, then, in your opinion, is the root of all our problems, our unwillingness to accept the original problem, the original sin of colonization and genocide? And if we did read and accept it, and maybe even made an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States a regular textbook in our junior highs or high school, would that even change the way, how much of an impact would that have on American culture?
Well, not alone. Although concepts and ideas certainly are important, and I think at certain periods in history they're more important than usual, and I think that's the case now because we're so here at the beginning of the 21st century. When we entered it with such buoyance of, you know, the anti-globalization movement and the battle in Seattle, and then came 2001, and I can see why some conspiracy theorists think it was staged because it had the effect of pretty well wiping out, years and years of organizing around racism. So when we sort of started over, in this new reality, we're kind of bankrupt, and now we're getting behind the climate change and the apocalypse that is ahead of us if we don't do something. But even that, it kind of reminds me of the nuclear, the anti-nuclear movement in the 60s and 70s and 80s until the end of the Cold War, and yet that hasn't gone away. In fact, the Obama administration has announced that it's going to beef up all its nuclear weapons and build more. And so that's still an issue, but we no longer think about it. And the climate, it is true, is going to cause all kinds of catastrophic conditions that we have to try to reverse it. But I do think that we cannot find a way to do that or to really make it into a systemic change. Because the capitalists are probably, not going to be convinced. So capitalism is one Native scholar in Canada, Glenn Coulthard, says, for Native people to live, capitalism must die. And I think that's probably true of the planet and all the people on it, that it's lasted this long, been dragged out, by United States power, and has long outlived its whatever positive effect it may have had in creating well-being or productive systems where people don't have to starve and so forth. But it's gone way beyond its usefulness to being a destructive element. So I'm really happy that Naomi Klein in her new book has really named capitalism as a central issue. And if that can be linked up with understanding how U.S. capitalism came to be and how restoring land bases to Native Americans should be inseparable from the climate conversion, because putting land back in the hands of, the stewards of the land is certainly one, these are the only people-controlled collective land bases in North America, are native lands. And that's important. That's important for the future. That's important for human survival. And that needs to be at the forefront of any organizing in everyone's interest, that Native peoples' land expansion and sovereignty, real sovereignty, that's not linked to the doctrine of discovery, of limitations by the colonial power, of real independence. This is in everyone's interest.
Roxanne, really a pleasure having you on the show. I very much enjoyed your book, and if you'd like to, you can now thank me for not sending you a Columbus Day card.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Roxanne, thank you
All
very
right.
much for being on the show. When this comes out in paperback, I know you'll have a new edition, and we'll have you back on the show because we only skim the surface of what I think is one of the most important history books to be written in quite a while. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. This is Hell. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We go till 1 p.m. This show would not exist if it wasn't for the great folks over at National Beer. National Beer is the only beer that comes in a can with a twist-off cap. Inside each cap, is a hieroglyph, a pictograph, a rebus, if you will, that imparts onto you, the soon-to-be drunk drinker of the horribly tasting National Beer, a little bit of twist-off knowledge. So let's hear it from the great folks over at National Beer.
This beer, yes, this beer.
Pow!
This beer, there's youth and verve in this beer.
There's youth and verve in this beer.
There's fun and serve in this beer.
Fun with National Beer.
National Beer is pleasure given, half a taste of pleasant living.
This beer, this National Beer, this beer right here.
By the way, just so you know, drinkers of National Beer, the FDA is looking into the verve the National Beer puts in their beer. They think it's genetically modified. Anyway, let's see what I can if I can figure out this twist off knowledge. What looks like 3/4. That oven minus N, that always means of, an American flag, what looks like a bunch of cops, the letter R, and what looks like a portrait of E.B. White, as in Strunk and White's Elements of Style, as in the author of Charlotte's Web. So let's see if I can figure this one out. 3/4 of American cops are E.B. White. What a weird disguise. Oh! 3/4 of U.S. police officers are white. Of course, we would not be doing our due diligence by offering a hangover cure at the beginning of the show. This morning's was the Senegalese spicy chicken stew yassa, and then a twist off knowledge to impress your drinking friends without giving a libation of the week, the drink you should seek out this week when impressing your friends with twist off knowledge, which will lead you to using our hangover cure the following morning. So this week's libation of the week comes from the Brooklyn Brewery. Brooklyn Brewery calls Brooklyn Blast a robust IPA. Let me translate that for you. Its alcohol by volume is 8.4%, so it's a friggin' double IPA. But I think Brooklyn uses the word robust because of the combination of American and British hops and German malt, which gives it gives the front end a floral taste that does not suggest a heavy double IPA. I was recently tasting the entire Brooklyn line with one of their representatives, and I told him that what I liked about Brooklyn is that the name on the bottle is what you get. The Pilsner, the Ale, the IPA, Oktoberfest, Lager, none of them is challenging or surprising, and none is bad. It's just good beer. But Brooklyn Blast stands out. As Brooklyn describes it, British Maris Otter and German Pilsner malts lends solidity, balance, and bready flavors to brace up a beer that's beautifully hoppy, strangely quaffable, and oddly compelling. Minerally hop bitterness is followed by a shock wave of flavor and aroma. So you can come and enjoy one with me on Polish Tuesday at Carrie's Lounge, 2251 West Devon. I will be hanging out there from 4 to 7 on Wednesday afternoon. That's what Polish Tuesday is. Wednesday afternoon from 4 to 7. You can also join me over there on Thursday during the Goose Island Tap Takeover that night, and we'll drink some Goose Island, but maybe we'll try a blast as well. By the way, our beer correspondent, Michael Roper of the Hop Leaf, 5148 North Clark Street. You can find out more about them at hopleaf.com. He's traveling through Europe, and this week he posted a picture on Facebook of himself running into the owner of the Brooklyn Brewery in Copenhagen. He's actually run into this guy before in Europe, just randomly run into the guy who owns Brooklyn Brewery. Man, it must be nice to own a craft brew or an amazing craft brew bar with a restaurant, because then you can traipse around Europe and stumble into your friends. Alex, how are we doing on Jeffy? You got him yet?
Oh, we're getting him right now.
Okay, no big deal. I got some stuff. Took care of that. Was this over here? Did I want to? Oh, yeah. The other thing that I want to point out to you, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, she says that if you may remember not, we had a guest on our show, David Vine, a couple of times. He's written books on Diego Garcia, the U.S. military base, and how they took all the native people off that island and they just moved them over to another country so we could have this huge military base to control the Middle East. She says that would not have happened if it wasn't for the United States culturally, historically refusing to confront the way in which we've displaced indigenous peoples in the past. So we continue that process that we've done to the indigenous peoples in the United States overseas, and in particular, she pointed out Diego Garcia, and you should find the writing of David Vine so you can see exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to that base. Don't forget, Jeremy Scahill will be speaking at the 35th annual dinner celebration for Chicago Area Peace Action. It's a dinner and conversation with Jeremy Scahill, and it takes place next Saturday, November 1st at 6 p.m. at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Gym. That's at 549 9th Street in Wilmette. Tickets for just the program start at $20. For the entire dinner, that starts at $75. More information, all you have to do is visit chipeaceaction.org. That's CHI peaceaction.org. I know you got Jeffy.
1, 2, you know what to do. One more time.
The moment of truth, 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 the moment of truth.
The deaths of Klinghoffer and Brown. Welcome to the moment of truth, the thirst that is the drink. I haven't seen the opera The Death of Klinghoffer about the hijacking of the cruise ship the Achille Lauro, and I wasn't in Ferguson, Missouri when Michael Brown was shot, so I am equally unqualified to comment on either one. But today's standards of journalism makes me an expert on both. It's all about balance, a balance of ignorance. Or maybe not. Maybe it's about something else. Who cares? These days, the criteria one must meet to be considered an expert on something are the same as the requirements for membership in an angry mob. This hasn't really lowered the bar for experts, but it does seem to have inflated the self-esteem of mobs. Let me say this about the death of Klinghoffer in my capacity as an expert. Whatever the mob may assert about its glorifying terrorism, I cannot, for the life of me, understand how an opera about the murder by Palestinian hijackers of a wheelchair-bound old Jewish man somehow portrays his killers in a glowingly positive light. Again, this is just the knee-jerk reaction of an expert, so take it with a grain of salt if you wish. Much the same reaction, but by a different mob, has greeted selectively leaked findings of one of 3 autopsies, the official autopsy, performed on the body of Michael Brown, who was fatally shot by police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, setting off demonstrations and a consequent police riot. The leaked findings suggest the possibility of a struggle between the cop and his victim, rather than a scenario in which the victim was fleeing or surrendering with his hands up. The Brown mob have panned these findings, much as the Klinghoffer mob have panned the opera. Although in the case of the Brown mob, there is an anti-Brown mob raving about the findings as if they entirely exculpate the cop. In fact, both Brown and anti-Brown mobs suspect the findings might vindicate the cop, but their reactions are opposed. Representatives of the police who want the facts to favor their fellow officer are already claiming the leaks prove their case. Representatives of the Brown family and their supporters dispute interpretations of the autopsies that might indicate Brown played a provocative role. One expert who's seen the autopsy report and has been quoted in the Washington Post and elsewhere says her comments were taken out of context and presented as though they support Officer Wilson's version of events more conclusively than they actually do. Yet, there's a major difference between the Brown mob and the Klinghoffer mob, and that is in the form taken by their respective oppositions. When the Brown mob demonstrated their disapproval of police behavior, the police battled them with tear gas, rubber bullets, and military surplus equipment. In the case of the Klinghoffer mob, the opposing camp went to see an opera. You'll notice there is no mob of Palestinians and their allies marching around in support of the opera and its supposed glorification of Palestinian terrorism. Either Palestinians don't support terrorism, or the opera doesn't glorify it, or they're just not up on opera. In any case, the only angry mob out there comprises a bunch of carping Jews and their equally small-minded supporters having a field day without apparent opposition. Such is my expert view. Even if Michael Brown were found to have been a threat to Officer Wilson, the circumstances leading to the shooting are still uncertain, and shooting an unarmed person 6 times until he's dead still seems excessive and questionable behavior for a cop. Obviously, for a professional killer or a very nervous civilian, such behavior might be perfectly sensible. We are conditioned to expect more from law enforcement professionals, though, or I think we are. I'm no expert. Officer Wilson's account of the shooting could be the truth. If it turns out it is, does that mean black men aren't disproportionately victimized by police, harassed, injured, incarcerated, and killed? No. Does it mean the minority residents of Ferguson are wrong in feeling racially profiled and persecuted by the police? No. Does it somehow mean Trayvon Martin deserved to be shot? No. Acceptance of the truth of one part of a specific story doesn't alter the truth of larger trends or external stories. It might, however, affect opinions. There are those who want us to believe young black men are more dangerous than other people and deserve to be harassed, shot, and imprisoned more often. While they might feel certain autopsy findings render their narrative more persuasive, said findings do no such thing. Likewise, if an opera shows Palestinian militants who hijacked the Achille Lauro in 1985 were in some way justified in feeling outrage at how their people were treated during the founding of Israel and afterwards, does that mean they're innocent of murdering a Jewish man? Does it make the opera anti-Jewish? No, and no. I'm not even using my expertise when I say that. There is a bad analogy to be made here, and bad analogies are the stock and trade of experts like myself. In comparing the protest against the Klinghoffer opera with the protests against the killing of Brown, through accidental logic, I position the Palestinians under Israeli occupation in comparison to the cops in Ferguson, Missouri. I didn't intend to make this analogy. It just happened. It fell out of my musings like a solid precipitating from some kind of chemical solution. But bad as the analogy may be, it does suggest a possible remedy to the rhubarbs under consideration. What if the mobs were to swap sides and also swap grievances? How about if the Ferguson protesters go to see the Klinghoffer opera and decide if it's anti-Jewish, and the anti-opera mob be tasked with policing the mainly black community of Ferguson? And why not have those who support the cop who shot Michael Brown go protest the death of Klinghoffer as anti-Jewish? Could shake things up. That would leave the opera goers to ponder what it might mean if the official autopsy report leads to no charges being brought against Officer Wilson. Does it mean evidence was tampered with and facts skewed by those in power? Does it mean Michael Brown deserved to be killed? Does it mean our whole society is in fact no longer racist and we don't have to worry about how we treat a group who find themselves mired in poverty and circulating through the criminal justice system in numbers way out of proportion to their percentage they make up of the general U.S. population? How long will the Ferguson police outside the Met be able to sustain their righteous Jewish indignation? Will the Ferguson protesters enjoy the opera? And will the anti-opera mob be as quick to use tear gas and batons when the opera goers appear on the streets of Ferguson in formal evening wear with their hands up? As an expert, I would welcome such confusion. It's not like we would have to change how we live according to the reactions of these displaced partisans. This is America, right? We're free to say anything we want and learn nothing. Anyone can make any claim, regardless of its plausibility. And with enough money or populist anger, they can get their voices heard and add their ludicrous claims to the national discussion. We don't know whom to trust, so we don't have to listen to anyone, and in any case, we're too paranoid to believe anything but what we already believe. Some phenomena are too obvious to conceal, of course, like the bias of the economic system toward those with excessive wealth, but even the obvious can be twisted until it becomes a Gordian knot, given enough money and disregard for ethical communication. What we have left is our outrage with apparent near coherence at its base. Any position can be challenged and undermined. Mysteriously counterintuitive facts emerge as if from nowhere. So we shop, not in a marketplace of ideas. We already own the ideas we've been willing to buy. We cling to those ideas. They are lighthouses amid the wild seas of contention. We're shopping for accessories for our ideas. Facts and stories and memes and statistics and comedic and dramatic phrases to support and ornament the ideas we've already bought. Capitalism was well on its way to defeating democracy when it figured out how to turn freedom of speech against the people. I should know. I am an expert. This has been the moment of truth. Good day.
Oh, Jeffy. Yeah, a couple of things I want to mention to you about today's show. In Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, she writes, according to a series of late 15th century papal bulls, European nations acquired title to the lands they discovered, and the indigenous inhabitants lost their natural right to that land after Europeans arrived and claimed it. According to a series of late 15th century papal bulls. Isn't that awesome?
That's very quick. Late 15th century. That's, I mean, 1492 was the ostensible discovery of the Americas. So within the next 8 years, the Vatican decided that they needed to legalize it.
Isn't that awesome? They were really on top of their game, man.
They were so ahead of the curve.
So again,
It's
another.
too bad they're not as progressive today.
So it's so the Native Americans who are suffering on reservations today, you can thank the Catholic Church.
I think they should go look at the legal documentation and understand that, they lost the legal battle.
I think they should take a civil suit against the Catholic Church and see how that works out.
That would be interesting. I just don't think they have a leg to stand on there. Just like God said so, and back then God was Catholic.
Hey, a couple things about, I got to tell you something real quick before I get to this next story. And that is, I was talking to my sister, and she was saying how her husband was really involved. Their family was really involved in the Catholic Church. They had like 17 kids. His mom had a kid every year for 11 years. His dad was like the top usher. His mom was always reading some Bible reading at the beginning of the Mass. They're way into the Catholic Church. And he was telling me how when he was a kid, as a snack, they would eat Eucharist, the sacrament, because they'd have them in their house all the time. So I mentioned this to Pete Valavanis, the owner of Carrie's Lounge, and he said, oh, yeah, I was an altar boy. We ate that all the time. And then another guy was sitting at the bar. He tells me the exact same thing, that kids used to snack on that stuff all the time.
Well, that's fine. It's not the body of Christ until it's magrified,
right,
or whatever
into sacrament. That is correct.
Huh?
That is correct. Until
it's just a piece of foamy. Who would eat that junk? Man?
You know what it tastes?
Terrible.
You know what it tastes like? Me, the first time I tasted freeze-dried hallucinogenic mushrooms.
Really?
Yeah.
Really, it tasted that strong. To me, it was just like, and it's not that I've had all the unblessed sacrament in Eucharist.
You shouldn't have any.
But I have tasted it.
Oh, what the hell are you tasting it for? Is that in one of your weird religious things?
No, somebody had some Catholic friend of mine in high school had some.
So you're
try some of this.
Out in the parking lot smoking cigarettes and eating Eucharist. Okay, so here's the other story I wanted to tell you about. Did you hear about the riot?
The wine was MD 2020.
My dad served that at our kitchen table one time. I referred to it as Mad Dog, and he got really mad at me.
Oh, yes. How dare you undignify that?
That Mogan David.
Good Lord.
So did you hear about the Pumpkin Fest riot in New Hampshire?
I did hear.
Okay, so just so people know,
I'm just glad that Danny Thompson was okay. I think of New England as very small and everybody living in one room.
So hundreds of college kids riot during New Hampshire's
They're
Pumpkin
all different
Fest.
countries up there.
Mayhem erupted at a pumpkin festival near Keene State College last Saturday. At least 49 people were arrested. 235 calls were made to police. In Keene, New Hampshire, there is an annual pumpkin festival each fall, which got off to its usual start as thousands of residents and tourists gathered to pick and carve pumpkins. But by the evening, the event took a chaotic turn. Hundreds of students gathered in the streets and backyards, drinking excessively and starting riots. Witnesses said that college students started throwing anything they could find. Most of the damage was caused by students from surrounding colleges, not just Keene State students. Young people came from the University of New Hampshire, the University of Rhode Island, and the University of Massachusetts, reported according to the Boston Globe. Now, whatever. Here are the comments in the comments section from BuzzFeed. So, CNN, just going to ignore the fact white people are rioting? Hashtag PumpkinFest.
There have been a lot of snarky comments about that riot.
Look at these thugs damaging their own neighborhood.
Yeah.
How un-American is this? Hashtag PumpkinFest.
These are no angels.
Look at these thugs and hoodlums. They need to get a job. White people in New Hampshire really need to do some self-reflection and regulate their animal impulses in the wake of PumpkinFest. Where are the leaders in the white community? They need to speak out against PumpkinFest. Why are they tearing up their own community? Hashtag Pumpkin Fest. So I just love those.
Pretty snarky.
Yeah. So there you go.
I have to recommend a novel I recently read.
What's that?
It's called Crocodile by Winkler. Anthony Winkler. No relation to Henry Winkler or any other Winkler except for his relations. That might not even be his name. Anyway, it's about, just because of this whole Eucharist thing, or the wafer, the host, it's about a Jamaican woman, lives in Jamaica, and who is angry at the way she's been treated by God, and she understands that when the wafer is transubstantiated or whatever, turned into, it actually becomes God. And so she gets a wafer. She's Catholic, so apparently you don't have to. You know, they used to lay it on your tongue, but in this nowadays they don't necessarily lay it on the tongue. They just give it to you. You put it on your own tongue.
Post Vatican II, yeah.
But instead of putting it in her mouth, she kidnaps it and she tortures it because it's God.
Crazy. # Jamaican people problems.
It's a really good book.
All right, Jeffy, I will look into it. You know, I was at a church one time where somebody took a Eucharist because they were bringing it back to their mother who was terminally ill, and there was a woman in the audience who went ape crazy. She went nuts. She was like, "Oh my God, he's a Satanist. He's stealing it." He was the head usher.
Stealing God.
Yeah.
He's stealing God.
All right, Jeffy.
But don't they have like a thing that you go through that like bells and stuff go off if you're carrying God out of the church?
Yes, they do, Jeff. Yeah, they do. Also, Jeff wanted to tell you to make sure to go check out the book Crocodile by Anthony Not Fonzie Winkler.
Yes.
So I will speak to you again maybe on November 8th. We will know on Monday how long our show is.
Yeah. Well, have a happy Halloween.
All right, you too, sir.
I'm going to have my own pumpkin fest.
You know, on Devil's Night, I'm going out.
Are you? Do they have Devil's Night in Chicago?
Hell no, I'm the only one. I'm starting it up.
Oh, man, I might come out for that.
Sweet. Bring your eggs and torches.
And toilet paper.
Yes. All right, talk to you soon. Stay beautiful. This is Hell. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. Where are we now on the clock? 12:59? Sweet. So we can finally wrap up the show. Let me make sure just say a few things. Oh, Alex, any more responses to the question from Hell?
No, the current ones stand.
All right, so the winners for the question from Hell for this week, they both win a copy of This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change. You can find out more about Naomi Klein's new book by going to thischangeseverything.org. The winners are Kate and Rich. Kate and Rich. Also, I don't know how many people have texted in yet, but if 3 people haven't texted in yet, do you know, Alex, did you check the line at all?
I'll do that right after.
No,
the
you
show.
don't have to. But if you want to still take a shot at winning passes to Red Moon's Celebration, all you have to do is text us 773-828-9682 773-U-BUY-OVA, and that will get you a couple of passes to tonight's Celebration. You can find out more about Celebration by going to redmoon.org, and don't forget that their awesome rave party is happening on Halloween night. They do it every year. It's called Bone Shaker. Make sure you check out the redmoon.org site for that. Naomi Klein will be appearing on Wednesday at the Drake Hotel. To find out more about that event, go to the ChicagoCouncil.org. I'll be hanging out on Wednesday at Carrie's from 4 to 7 p.m. Feel free to join me so we can maybe enjoy a libation of the week, which this week was the Brooklyn Brewery's Blast. On Thursday, I'll be back over there after 7-ish because the Goose Island is doing a tap takeover. I really want to meet some of our listeners over at Carrie's Lounge this week because we are not having a show on November 1st due to a sports programming marathon. And then on next Sunday, they're showing the International Roller Derby Championships over at Carrie's Lounge, and I'll probably be there for that as well. So I'd love to see some of our listeners out for that. All right, let's wrap it up there. So we do have a question from Hell for our November 8th show. We are not on next week, November 1st. So we have a question from hell that's going to linger for 2 weeks. The winner gets our final copy of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change. And because Halloween is coming up, our question from hell that you can respond to by emailing chuck@thisishell.com, or you can just post it at our Facebook page. Our question from hell for you is, it's Halloween. So what scares you more than ISIS, ISIL, or whatever they're calling the Islamic State today? What scares you more than ISIS? I want to thank Theron Humiston for producing this morning's show, and Alexander Jerry. Thanks to our correspondents, Ladio.com and Kevin Harris. Our guests, Jeremy Scahill, Doug Henwood, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Thanks to you for tuning into This Is Hell. Make sure you sign up for our This Is Hell email newsletter at thisishell.com. Like us on Facebook. Follow us at This Is Hell Radio on Twitter. Share our posts, share our files on SoundCloud, and give us a really great rating over at iTunes so we can move up the ladder and do some damage to Bill Maher, that horrible, horrible human. I'm your bitter, blind, broke, gap-toothed radio show host, Chuck Mertz. There is only one way to get over all of the problems that we've introduced to you on this morning's show. That's by sitting down in the lotus position, turning your palms towards the sky, focusing on that burning white dot in the middle of your forehead, and saying these simple words, everybody's stupid.
My demon is on my butt.
Matt Damon.
My demon talks to me in profanity like a sailor. And my demon tries to knock me down. And my demon tries to put me on a hell ride.